Today, we're hitting the loneliest highways of Texas, where every mile brings its own nightmare. From phantom rigs tailing you in the dead of night to whispers crawling through your sleeper cab, get ready for 20 terrifying, true Texas trucker horror stories that'll make you question every rumble in the distance. But first, most folks make one huge mistake. They cruise off without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Smash that subscribe button now, or you'll miss the darkest encounters from drivers who swear they weren't alone on those endless blacktop dots. So tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Drop your city and clock reading in the comments, lock your doors, and brace yourself. Because on these Texas roads, the real horror waits just beyond the headlights. Let's roll into story number 1. I remember that night like it was carved into my bones. The way the asphalt seemed to breathe under the wheels. The mileposts sliding past like ghostly sentinels, marking my slow descent into something that shouldn't have an explanation. My name's Carter Briggs, and I've driven 18-wheelers up and down this stretch of Highway 59 for 18 years. I've seen flat tires in the middle of nowhere and truckers crumpled in the ditches by midnight fatigue, but nothing prepared me for the voice on my CB dot. It all started just past the old Baker Bridge, where the road bends around that shallow crook of Sabine Lake, the water dark as molasses under a cloudless sky. I'd been on the road for almost 40 hours, barely slept, but adrenaline kept me upright. The rig's engine thrummed like a heartbeat, the gauges steady, the fuel light a dull orange glow down on the console. I flipped on my CB, expecting the usual droning static or the crackle of some other lonely hauler looking for a hot load. Instead, it was a whisper so faint I thought at first it was the breeze rattling the mic. "Please," the voice said. "Please help me." I stopped breathing. My hand slid off the wheel, fingers grazing the lit button on channel 19. "There?" I asked, voice tight against the cab's hum. The whisper was gone. A cracked breath. Nothing but the click of my own breathing. I switched channel 17. 18, nothing but the sound of distant hail on metal. Came back to 19. "Please help me." That same tiny voice, as fragile as a moth's wing, drifted through the static again. I knew that voice. Soft, childlike, with the faintest southern lilt, and I swear I froze mid-breath, because that voice belonged to Jenna Hartman, the girl who died in the bus crash right here 20 years ago this month. Her name was all over the tragedy. Parents screaming in the courthouse, news crews crawling over the wreckage. The bus had missed that curve, slid through the guardrail, and flipped into the swampy inlet below. 12 dead children, Jenna among them, her body recovered with the others, faces pressed in terror against twisted seats. She'd only been 9. I slammed the rig into park, the wheels grinding against asphalt, engine roaring like an angry beast. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down, the air so cold I could see my breath puff in clouds. Not a leaf moved. Highway 59 stretched into darkness, a ribbon of black between flooded marsh and the thick pines that leaned over the road like watchful judges. I clicked the mic again. "Jenna, is that you?" Silence. Then a laugh so soft it sounded underwater. Distant, as if it were echoing from 20 years back in time. But that laugh, God help me, was hers. I looked around, no car lights, no figures. My headlights carved a tunnel of yellow into the night, cutting the swamp's glossy sheen. I could see half-submerged deer skeletons, trees splintered like broken ribs. Even my own shadow looked wrong, elongated and wavering in the beam. "Jenna," I whispered. I walked to the guardrail, ran my hand across the chipped metal, rust eating at it like decay in slow motion. Below, the water was black, oily. I thought I saw movement, something drifting just below the surface. A tiny hand with fingernails clutching a stray school button. My blood ran cold. I scrambled back to the cab, slammed the door. The engine refused to turn over, just static thumping in my ears. The mic crackled with a new voice, deeper, like wind through barren branches. "You shouldn't have come back." I hit the starter again. Wheels spun, but no life. My heart hammered. I reached for my phone, no signal. Of course, this was the dead zone. And now, apparently, a dead girl haunting it. I clicked the CB again. "I'm leaving," I said, voice shaking. "I swear I'm leaving." The static cleared, and there she was, soft and wounded. "Help me." Then a rush of water, cold and unmistakable, like an icy hand brushing my neck. I yanked open the door and bolted around the back of the trailer, flashlight in hand. The swamp stretched vast and moonlit. The air smelled of rot and decay. I shone. The beam across the water, nothing but reeds and scattered boards. Then the beam caught something, a small backpack bobbing at the edge of the water. Bright pink, fraying straps. Jenna's backpack had been pink. Had to be. I stepped forward. On rotted ground, each step sucking at my boots. The water lapped at my ankles. I knelt, reached for the pack. My fingers brushed the wet fabric and I froze. The pack was heavy. Inside, I heard it, soft sobbing. I torn it open. Then a blur of motion. Something dragged me forward into the water. I hit the water hard, swallowed swamp stink. My flashlight went out. I kicked wildly, heart in my throat. Hand slender, pale gripped my ankle, trying to drag me down. I punched at the water, clawed against the unseen. My adrenaline flared and I burst free, scrambled up the bank, backpack slipping from my hands and sinking with a splash. I didn't wait. I ran cold water clinging to my jeans back to the cab, twisted the key. The engine roared to life like Joseph's coat of many colors coming back after years of silence. I spun the rig around, tires burning rubber on the wet asphalt, and tore away from that spot faster than I've ever driven in my life. Behind me, the CB squawked once more. A voice, soft but now angry, kissed my ear through the static. "Don't go." I didn't. I couldn't. I floored it, every mile marker. A prayer. I didn't look back when the Baker Bridge faded in my mirror. At the rest stop in Beaumont, I sat shaking, engine idling, the rig's cab bathed in neon yellow. I pulled the CB mic close. "This is Briggs," I said. "If there's any good ghost out there, tell Jenna she can rest." Silence. Then, so? Faint, I almost doubted it, came one whispered word. "Thank you." And that was the end of it. No more laughter, no screams, no whispers. Jenna Hartman never spoke again. But sometimes, when the moon is low and I'm alone on that stretch of 59, I swear I feel a tug at my heart, reminding me that some things in this world don't belong to the living, and some voices, once heard, never truly leave the night. I first saw it just past sunset on County Road 84, where the overpass stretches like a steel gargoyle's grinning jaw against the bruised sky. I was rolling eastbound, tires humming against asphalt, windows down to let in the dust-hot wind as the last heat of the day fought the creeping cold. My rig's headlights cut twin arcs of brightness through the gathering dusk, and that's when I saw her, or it clinging beneath the overpass girder, half dissolved in shadow and half bleached by my high beams. At first I thought it was a trick of light, some discarded tarpaulin snagged on a tooth of the structure. But as I eased on the throttle, the shape shifted, limbs unwinding like rotting ribbon, and two eyes flared pale as bone. I didn't slam my brakes that night, though. I damn near should have. I kept going until the bridge receded behind me like a bad dream, but the sight stuck to me, something caught in memory that wouldn't shake loose. At every diner I pulled into afterward, I twitched at movement beyond the windows, listening. to the shiver rattle of cold air through the cracked door and imagining that same thin face pressing against the glass. The wraith, they called it. To know its name was to invite it near. Rumors spread among rigs. One I heard said it was the ghost of a woman who jumped off the overpass in '92, her body broken on the road below, her spirit bound to the girders she touched in her last moment. Another whispered that it was a hitchhiker murdered by a brother too drunk to remember, his blood spattered on the concrete, calling her home. The road that night was empty until I hit the thicker traffic near Baytown, where even the rumble of 18 wheels felt quiet. I booked it to the Motel Sandstone, bargaining with Martin the clerk until he gave me a room for cheaper than the sign said. Inside, I fired up an old heater and sat in the cracked vinyl chair, chain-smoked cigarettes burning holes in the ashtray, trying to scrub the image of her gaunt shape from my mind. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked hollow, eyes sunken. Like I was already part of that story. Sleep found me at dawn, curled in overalls and boots, but it never lasted. The nightmare came first. I was floating beneath the bridge, gravity gone, looking up at my rig snarling overhead. My headlights flashed on, and there she was, contorting her thin body through the girders, a ragged dress torn like peeling paint, skin bone pale and stretched over ribs. She reached for me, fingers cracking, and I woke choking on sweat, the mattress soggy and my heart pounding like a piston. That morning I drank coffee out of a chipped mug at the diner next door, voice shaky when I ordered eggs. The waitress gave me a pitying look, like she'd seen it before. Maybe she had died by the time I pulled back onto the highway. The sun was already strong, baking the pavement. I kept my eyes on the road, convinced that if I looked up I'd see her hunched silhouette motionless just out of reach. Mile markers clicked by. 135, 136, 137, approaching the overpass. My stomach twisted into knots. My rig's windows rattled, and the radio died, static rasping. I considered pulling off, going another way. But this was my route. I had a deadline in Austin by midnight, and no one cared about my terror as long as I had the trailer loaded where it belonged. When I reached the underpass, I slowed. The highway narrowed, concrete walls climbed on both sides, and the sky was little more than a strip of blue above the girders. My headlights caught a flash of white so fast I thought I'd misseen it. I drifted under, slow as a funeral procession, the engine idling loud in my ears. Then I heard something, a scraping like nails dragging on metal. My pulse slammed against my ribs. I peered left, then right. Nothing but empty air and the cold bulkheads holding the bridge in place. I moved forward, tires rolling over cracks in the pavement, and at that moment the wraith dropped. She burst from the shadows in a tangle of limbs, falling like a moth drawn into flame. Her eyes were black pits, bleeding streaks of crimson from the sockets. She hovered inches from my windshield, mouth stretched into a silent howl. My breath caught in my throat. Mirrors rattled, and the rig rocked as though the weight of that spirit pressed against the glass. I slammed my fist into the horn. The shriek of the horn split the air, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she pressed her face against the glass, her voice a rasp of static whispering my name. I floored the accelerator, wheels spinning as I shot through the underpass, leaving her trailing behind like smoke. The rearview mirror caught her for a moment, a white blur sliding under the bridge as though she'd fallen back into the darkness. My heart hammered so loud I thought the glass would crack. I didn't stop until I hit the city limits, where the lights thrummed and the road forked into highways leading nowhere that mattered. I pulled off at the first exit, found a parking lot, turned off everything, leaned back in my seat, and closed my eyes. When I opened them, nothing had changed. No broken windshield, no bleeding eyes, just the wide emptiness of the parking lot and the hum of distant traffic. I left my rig there that night, paid a tow to come fetch it, told them there was a mechanical issue. When I walked away, I never looked back, only heard the faint scrape of tires against gravel behind me, like ice sliding over stone. I caught a bus to San Antonio, then a flight home. They said I was lucky the overpass was due for demolition in a few weeks. Crews would pull it down, grind it to dust, and they claimed that would free whatever was trapped. But I know better. Shadows don't die with concrete. They slip through cracks, hitch rides and headlights, waiting for the next rig to roll through at dusk, willing the driver to glance up. Because once you see her, she owns that road and she doesn't let go. Not until she's claimed another soul. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't hear her faint whisper every time I closed my eyes at night, calling me back to the underpass, begging me all too sweetly to come home. He first saw the fog like a sheet of milk stretched across the road, thick and unbroken, as if dawn had broken in reverse and daylight had leached away. The headlights of his old Ford F-150 slit into the gray nothing, revealing neither shoulder, nor fence nor ditch, just that endless curtain rolling toward him. He gripped the wheel, knuckles whitening. He was nearly 20 miles from Pecos alone, heading home after a late delivery. He told himself there was nothing to worry about. Fog in West Texas was as common as dust, but the second time the low cloud brushed the windshield, he felt the pulse of fear in his throat dot. By the time he slowed to 20 miles an hour, something emerged from the haze beside the road. A horse's head, bone white and dripping dew, muzzle low, nostrils flaring. The horse glanced at the truck, eyes black holes, and as the beams of light revealed the rest of its slick ribs visible beneath the pallid flesh, a rope looped around its neck, it faded back into the mist. He exhaled, unsteady, convinced he'd imagined it, until the echo of hoofbeats pounded behind him. He dared not look over his shoulder. He tried the radio, flipping through AM static, but found only dead stations. The needle bled red below the dial. He put the truck into gear and edged forward, trying to outrun the chill that crept from the fog into his bones. But the fog moved too fast in ocean tide that lapped at the cab, and swallowed every glimmer of the world behind the glass. A mile down the road, the truck fishtailed around a slick patch of road, dank with moisture. He skidded, fought the wheel, and came to a stop facing a grove of mesquite trees that had materialized out of the gray. Their limbs arched overhead like the ribs of some giant carcass. He killed the engine. In the silence, he heard a whisper of laughter, a hollow echo that might have come from wind, but sounded strangely human. His breath clouded in the cab. He flicked the light switch, peering through the mist, but saw nothing except the lean shapes of mesquite and sage. He told himself to go on, to put this stretch of road behind him, but as his foot slipped back toward the accelerator, a form moved at the edge of the headlights. A man on horseback, dressed in ragged buckskins from another century, high-crowned Stetson pulled low. The man sat motionless, his horse's hot breath steaming into the air. The driver's foot pressed down, and the truck lurched forward. The specter followed, keeping pace for a dozen heartbeats. The rider's face a sickly blank mask, mouth twisting into a rictus grin. The truck's engine stuttered as if the ghost had reached out and throttled it, but it kept going. The driver's eyes stung with tears, fear, and something deeper, a sorrow that squeezed like a fist around his heart. He thought of his grandmother, waiting in Pecos, of mashed potatoes and the comforting hum of her television set. Just go home, he told himself. Don't look back. The fog boiled around him as he passed under an ancient overpass, its concrete stained by time and neglect. A group of shapes stood beneath it, 6 or 7 men in wide-brimmed hats, hands resting on rifle stocks, staring as the truck slid past. He saw the glint of moonlight off steel, heard the faint crack of a rifle hammer. His pulse hammered in his ears. At the other side of the underpass, the fog lifted as quickly as it had fallen. The road lay bare, black asphalt stretching to the faint horizon, the stars shining overhead. The sudden clarity was a promise of safety, but his relief was a bitter thing. His fuel gauge blinked low. He coasted to a halt at a crossroads and killed the engine again, listening. No whispers now, only the hum of crickets and the distant cry of coyotes. He wiped his brow. The deli cooler at Grandma's would be warm. By now, he killed the headlights, letting his eyes adjust to pure darkness. Then, somewhere behind him, 2 rifle shots cracked. He jerked the lights back on, finger trembling, and saw nothing but shadows where the fog had been. His chest tightened. He dove for the radio again, slamming through the knobs until a station came alive scratchy. Tinny voices arguing politics. He didn't care. He slammed the radio off. He backed up the truck, turned it around, and floored it toward Pecos. The engine roared like a caged lion, and for a moment he thought he'd left that other world behind. But as the highway stretched out in front of him, a new fog drifted across the lane, thinner this time, but every bit as real. And there, riding between the lanes, was that pale horse again, with its head craned toward him, rope swaying, rib cage gleaming. And behind it, mounted on the same ghostly steed, was the rider, tipping his hat in greeting as though he'd been expecting him all along. The driver screamed, but no sound came. He pressed the gas, but the truck crawled forward, the road beneath him sticky. The horse kept pace, cantering alongside, and the rider's grin widened until it seemed to fill the sky. The fog thickened, pressuring the glass so hard it rattled. One hoof strike tore the pavement, fracturing the asphalt. The horse's eye turned toward him, and the driver saw in its reflection not just the specter of the rustler, but the highway itself, a ribbon of death winding through the desert. Then the world quaked. The underpass he'd passed earlier reared. Up in front of him, jacked its concrete girders into the sky. The ghostly gang stood beneath it again, rifles leveled, their hats low. The horse reared, shrieking, and the fog convulsed, curling into columns of gray vapor that danced like tortured spirits. Hopeless, he rammed the truck into gear, smashing into the wall of mist. The windshield shattered, and the world went white. He felt a hand-cold skeletal press against his shoulder. A voice rasped in his ear. "We're still riding, pardner." He woke behind the wheel, sunlight flooding the cab, the truck parked in Grandma's driveway. The engine idled. He blinked, skin clammy. The door creaked open, and she emerged, stooped, flowered dress, arms out. He stared at her, mouth open. She touched his cheek. "You okay, son?" He didn't answer. He looked past her. Down the road, no horse, no rider, nothing but heat ripples on the asphalt. He climbed out, stared at the empty highway, and whispered the words he'd heard in the fog. "We're still riding." Grandma rubbed his arm. It was just a dream. "Not a dream," he said, voice hollow. "Not a dream at all." And somewhere down the road, he was sure he heard hoofbeats fading into the distance, the promise that the rustlers still roamed, waiting for the next rig to wander into their fog. A distant howl of wind rattled the windshield as he sat hunched over the wheel, knuckles white against the cold metal of the steering column. The freight's engine had coughed its last breath hours ago, buried beneath a desert blizzard that had come roaring out of nowhere, turning tumbleweeds into swirling ghosts of dust and ice. He'd been hauling cattle feed from Amarillo to El Paso when the snow hit first as a dusting that he'd laughed off, then as slithering fingers of frost that clung to his mirrors, and finally as a choking wall of white that forced him off the highway and onto a side road. Now he was stuck, the semi-trailer's wheels spinning fruitlessly in the drifts, the cab's heater sputtering like an asthmatic in its death throes. He kicked the dashboard in frustration, half hoping to revive the heater, half convinced it was useless. Out here, the temperature must have plunged well below zero, though he could no longer trust his gauges. The needle on the thermometer had jammed, frozen right at the top. Every breath inside the cab felt like inhaling shards of glass. He tried staying awake, banging on the ceiling, yelling at himself to keep alert, but the fatigue had closed in like a predator stalking its prey. Somewhere behind his eyelids, snow continued its silent invasion, drifting through the cracks, gathering in tiny white hills on the dashboard. He had no choice but to sleep if he wanted to survive the night. He unclasped his seatbelt, rubbed his shoulders to loosen the stiffness, and shifted into the sleeper berth behind the driver's seat. It was cramped, no more than a 10-inch mattress, squeezed into a metal coffin, and the thin blankets were as good as cardboard, cuttings of fabric stolen from motel rooms and truck stops. He curled up in his parka and gloves, sliding his satchel under his head like a pillow. Before he could drift off, he flicked on the overhead light, tossing one last glance around the cabin, his cigarette lighter the dog-eared paperback of Poe's. Tailies, the small plastic crucifix he'd tied to the sun visor after his grandmother's funeral. Superstition, he thought, but old habits die hard. Sleep was a luxury he could ill afford, but exhaustion claimed him anyway. In the darkness behind his eyelids, the roar of the storm faded, replaced by the gentle hush of snow settling on the roof, and then he heard it, a faint, tentative scratching, like fingernails raking against wood. His heart jolted him upright. He strained in the dark, listening. Silence. He closed his eyes, convinced he'd imagined it, and tried to drift back to sleep. But the scratching came again, louder this time, reverberating through the metal walls of the sleeper. He froze, every muscle taut, as the sound moved, skittered, as if circling him beneath the mattress. He wanted to call out, to smash the ceiling with his boot, but his voice lodged in his throat, torn away by a terror he couldn't name. He clicked on the overhead light. The cabin glowed harshly, the blankets pooling at his waist like spilled paint. He slid off the mattress, creaking in protest, and knelt on the floor. He yanked at the mattress cover, exposing the cold fiberglass beneath. The scratching stopped, and so did his breath. He felt, rather than saw, a presence, a weight, shifting under the berth. He prodded with his gloved hand, expecting nothing more than metal framework or a loose bolt, but his fingers met flesh. Cold flesh, softer than any mechanical part. He jerked back, slammed the mattress down, and stumbled back to his feet. Only then did he notice them faint, smeared prints on the ceiling of the sleeper just above the tiny ventilation grate. Tiny handprints, spaced too close together to be adult, each print rimmed with a grit of snow that had somehow worked its way inside. His pulse pounded like a jackhammer. He stumbled back to the driver's seat, hands shaking as he fumbled for the two-way radio. "Dispatch, this is 28 Alpha, he rasped, voice cracking. "I need—" Static filled his ears. He cursed under his breath and punched the call button again, voice rising. "Dispatch, do you read me?" "They." Radio crackled once, then died, replaced by the roar of the wind. He tried the cell phone. No bars, no network. Nothing but dead silence. As dread gathered behind his ribs, he noticed movement in the rearview mirror. A blur of white, like a child in a thin dress, moving just behind him, half-formed, hovering inches above the mattress. His breath fogged. In the cold air as he stared, disbelieving, the figure faced away, shoulders hunched, long dark hair hanging like wet ropes. It lifted one small arm and pressed its palm against the ceiling, aligning its little fingers with the prints he had just seen. Then it turned its head too fast, too smoothly, and for a moment the overhead light caught two hollow pits where eyes should have been. He screamed. He lunged forward, yanking open the door and slamming back onto the snow-covered ground. The biscuits of ice bit into his palms and he fell, scrambling away from the rig until his parka snagged on the metal. Steps. He wrestled free and ran, slipping over drifts, hard hammering. But the desert expanse offered no shelter, only the endless white. Behind him, the semi's lights blinked weakly as though blinking out. The howl of the wind became a chorus of whispering voices. He could swear he heard laughter, childish and cruel, carried on the wind like shards of broken glass dot in the distance. He thought he saw shapes drifting on the snow-pale silhouettes, smaller than men, trailing long shadows. Under the unforgiving moon. He kept running until his lungs burned, until he thought his heart would burst. Then he realized there was nowhere to go. No roads, no landmarks, nothing but the storm and the specters of the desert night. He turned back toward the rig, every footfall sinking into the drifts. The passenger side door hung open, hinges twisted. Snow had intruded, piling high enough to bury a man up to his waist. The cabin's interior light flickered, then went out, leaving the glassy windows as black. Mirrors. He crawled back inside, teeth chattering, and climbed onto the ice-hardened blankets. He huddled beneath them, arms wrapped tight, as the wind slapped at the exterior in staccato bursts. He tried not to listen, but the scratching resumed this time on the roof, crawling, moving, as if something were pacing overhead, searching for a way in. Panic rose like bile in his throat. He pressed himself flat, willing exhaustion to reclaim him, to dream him into oblivion. But sleep escaped him, and with it, the fragile barrier between the living and whatever dwelled in the storm-swept waste. He stared at the ceiling, at the prints that had multiplied, branching out like the root system of a dead tree. From the darkness above, a gloved hand slid through the vent, its fingers scraping the metal grate before curling around the edge. The grip tightened. He bit back a scream, felt the mattress shift as the creature began to squeeze through Dot in that final, frozen moment. He understood. This was no hallucination, no trick of the blizzard. Something had been awakened by his presence, drawn from some place beneath the desert's ancient bones, hunting for warmth, for life. The fingers emerged next, white and brittle, clawing at the seam between floor and ceiling, scraping away paint. Like fingernails on skin. The creature pulled itself partway through the vent, its many-limbed body unfolding like a twisted flower of ice and shadow. He didn't see its face, he couldn't bear to, but he heard its breath, raspy and hollow, and a quiet cooing that sounded not quite human. His vision swam. He felt it touch his ankle, a cold weight that slid over his boot, as chilling as a corpse's kiss. His will collapsed. Everything went blacked out when morning came. The sun rose weakly over a sea of snow, pale and timid. The rig stood abandoned on the desert road, its door ajar, engine cold. Inside, the sleeper berth was empty. The blankets rumpled as if someone had clawed their way out in terror. On the ceiling, the little prints remained, frozen in place like a verdict, small hands reaching down, beckoning anyone who came after to join the feast. And somewhere beneath the road, where the earth swallowed metal and machine, something stirred, its hunger unquenched. I never thought I'd be awake at 3 in the morning, 200 miles from anywhere on a stretch of road that barely registered on a map, listening to a scratchy radio channel that ought to have been dead years ago. But there I was, hunched, over the CB in the cab of my rig, the glow of the dash lights painting the windshield in dull orange, the desert night pressing in like velvet and hiding everything beyond the shallow cone of my headlights. Channel 19 was my lifeline if something went wrong. And tonight, like every other night, I idle there, thumb resting on the mic, ready to bark out a distress call if I needed help. I was hauling livestock in a 53-foot trailer, and the cattle's Low, rumbling breaths thumped through the floor like a muted heartbeat. It was monotonous work, too many hours, too many miles, and the same unending black ribbon of asphalt, and I'd taken to leaning on the radio to keep my mind from seizing up on boredom. At first, it was nothing but static. A chorus of hisses and pops that filled my cab with a white noise lullaby. I closed my eyes for a second and thought about the kids at home, about how I'd promised to be back before school started. I pictured my kid's face, half asleep and uncomprehending the last time I called. I'd missed choir practice, missed taco night, and the guilt weighed heavier than any load I hauled. The static crackled harder, like a faint storm trapped inside the speaker. I reached up and flicked the squelch control, but nothing changed, still that restless hiss. Abruptly, a voice cut through, clipped and distant. S-somebody ... My eyes snapped open. The gauge lights blurred behind a sudden rush of adrenaline, and my hand tightened on the mic. Breaker, this is Big Dog 45. I got a cattle trailer headed eastbound on US 83, anybody copy? My voice sounded unnatural in my ears, too loud. There was a pause, then nothing but static. I tapped the mic again. Anybody on? Channel 19? Static. Then the voice returned, so faint I nearly missed it. I'm Elp. It sounded like a child sobbing into the microphone, but the warp of time in the transmission made it old, brittle, as if it had been recorded long ago and was looping back through the ether. My knuckles went white. Who is this? You sound like hell. Silence, then a click, a breath rasping through the speaker, and a name, Morgan. My heart hammered. Morgan Barton, 17, radio dispatcher's daughter, died on this stretch 10 years ago when her father drove her out to meet some long-haul trucker at dawn, and the rig skidded off the curve by the old service station. They found her clutching the CB mic, mouth open in a silent scream. Legend says she never hung up, that her voice drifts through the static for truckers brave or stupid enough to listen. I glanced at the rearview mirror. My reflection stared back, ghost pale in the dash glow. I remembered the story. Her eyes were gone, her skull cracked like an eggshell. Her father refused to believe she was gone and kept the dispatch boards running, left Channel 19 open, prayed for her return. Finally pulled the plug on the tower, deemed it too morbid, but local rigs still hear her sometimes. Truckers whisper that she's hunting for a ride home. The trailer rattled under the tires, cows uneasy in the sudden cold. I hesitated. Every rational bone in my body told me to flip to another channel or shut the radio off. But something, a magnet buried in part curiosity, part dread, kept me locked in. Morgan? I whispered and the mic crackled in response. Burn, she said, voice quivering like a dying ember. Burn him. Who? Who's he? I swallowed hard. The desert wind gusted outside, though the night was eerily calm. My eyes scanned the horizon for headlights, a sign of life. Nothing. Static intensified, then faded, replaced by soft crying. The sound was so close I could almost taste the tears. I flicked the volume down, but still the crying burrowed into my skull. Morgan, you've got to go home. You're not real. Sigh, brittle as dry twigs, and then a male voice broke through the deep, hollow tone of someone beyond death. He's coming. My blood froze. I looked at the odometer. I'd passed the service station ruined 5 miles back. The rusted pumps leaned drunkenly. Graffiti covered the walls, vultures circling overhead by day, silent sentinels by night. The hairs on my neck stood up. Who's coming? I rasped, voice trembling. Daddy. Morgan's whisper, frigid and final. Daddy said he'd come get me. The cab seemed to sag around me. I fumbled with the dial, ready to jam it off Channel 19 forever. But as my thumb hovered, I caught movement in the mirror. Nothing behind me but the barren road, and then a pair of headlights, too bright, too sudden, cutting through the darkness. Like twin lasers. They grew closer, though I hadn't accelerated. My breathing hitched. The voice came again, urgent. Don't let him. Static swallowed the rest, and the light slammed into the back of my trailer with a blast of wind, as if a ghost truck had materialized and rammed me. The rig shuddered violently, cattle bawled in panic, and the radio exploded into a high-pitched shriek that clawed at my eardrums. I slammed the brakes, metal grinding, and the truck fishtailed into the gravel shoulder. Heart pounding, I jammed the gear into park and ripped open the door. The desert night slapped me cold as glass. I stood on the hot gravel, chest heaving, sweating under my coat, but only my heartbeat echoed in my ears. The headlights had vanished. I stumbled back to the cab, hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the mic. Breaker. Big dog 45-something just hit my trailer near mile 122 on US 83. Anybody out there? Nothing. The radio hummed empty. I turned the key. The engine roared. Lights blinked. I shifted into drive and pulled back onto the road, every muscle screaming to run. But a bit further down, just past the curve, I saw the service stations. Old sign swinging in the wind. Underneath, scrawled in red paint, the word welcome stared at me like a grin of jagged teeth. I floored it, tires spitting gravel, and didn't stop until I hit the next town's glow. I punched the mic again. Dispatch, this is Big Dog 45. I'm 5 miles west of Lajitas requesting patrol and tow for my trailer. Heard a child's voice on Channel 19, got sideswiped by an unseen vehicle. Do you copy? There was a pause, then a crackle. Big Dog 45, we copy. Emergency services dispatching now. I hung up the mic and sat there, engine idling, hands trembling on the wheel. The road behind me was an empty ribbon of black. Channel 19 lay dormant, silent at last. Later, I learned they found skid marks. Near the abandoned pumps, deep gouges in the asphalt that led off into the brush. They found cattle stampeded across the shoulder where I'd stopped. No sign of another rig. No sign of Morgan Barton or her father. Just fresh tire tracks that ended abruptly, as if the truck had vanished into thin air. I still keep my CB tuned. To Channel 19, half in hope, half in horror. Sometimes late at night, when the world outside is still and the hum of the engine rattles my bones, I hear a faint crackle and think I recognize that voice. A girl begging for a ride home. And I know that some roads never let you leave, not really, and some voices never die. I never should have agreed to haul that manifest at 3 in the morning. The dispatch board blinked empty before I signed in, and when I clicked on the freight details, the manifest read like a joke. 1 pallet, destination unknown, no hazmat. Codes, no consignee name, no special instructions. My dispatcher, Marlene, sounded hoarse when I called her. That load isn't supposed to be on your schedule, she said, voice trembling. Don't ask me questions, just get it done. So I climbed into my cab feeling the slow ache of dread coil in my gut. The road out of Amarillo was quiet as a graveyard, wide Texas sky above turning ink black. My headlights carved a narrow tunnel of light. I punched the throttle, the diesel engine chugging like a wounded beast beneath me, and rolled toward the coordinates. No street address appeared on my GPS, just an empty rectangle in the panhandle landscape. I passed dead rattlers flattened on the asphalt, metal signs warning of cattle crossing swinging in the wind, nothing else alive. When I pulled up to the loading dock, it was abandoned. Concrete loading bays sat cracked and overgrown, the rusted doors gaping open like empty maws. My trailer waited under a flickering sodium lamp that sputtered on and off in waves. I killed the engine and climbed down, phone flashlight bobbing in my hand. The dock was eerily silent except for distant cattle lowing and a faint hum I couldn't place. I hesitate before stepping inside the trailer, every hair on my neck prickling. Inside, the wooden floorboards creaked. I clicked on my handheld light. There it stood, a single pallet wrapped in black plastic sheeting so matte it drank the beam hole. Nothing else. No crate labels, no tape, no branding. I stepped forward, heart thumping, and ran my gloved hand along the plastic. It was cold, unnaturally so, like touching the surface of a morgue slab. I looked back to the cab. Marlene's guttural warning echoed in my head. Don't ask questions. I yanked out my pocket knife and sliced through the sheeting, careful to avoid what might lie within. The plastic collapsed inward, releasing a rush of stale air as if something exhaled, and I saw it. A row of bodies? No bundles, shapes I couldn't quite parse in the dim light. I choked on the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My flashlight trembled. I stabbed the beam at the shapes. Human footprints in dried mud led up the inside walls of the trailer, impossibly high, as though someone had crawled in and pressed against the ceiling. But there was no ceiling damage, no drywall residue, nothing to explain the water-stained footprints that vanished at 40 inches above the floor. My rational brain muttered half-hearted theories, rats, water spillage, rodents dragging themselves up, but my gut screamed in protest. I pried apart the bundles. Inside were limbs thin, gaunt forearms with brittle gray skin, pale fingernails, jagged like splintered bone. The odor hit me then, a rancid sweetness that burned my sinuses. With nausea clawing my throat, I backed out, fumbling my radio handset. Dispatch, do you copy? Nothing but static. The hum grew louder, throbbing, as though the trailer itself was alive. Behind me, I heard scraping. I spun and saw the pallet shudder, the bundles twitch. I ran to the cab, hyperventilating, keys in hand, slammed the door, and fired up the engine. All gauges flickered. The hum vibrated through the seat beneath me. I jammed the truck into gear and gunned it down the access road, tires screaming on cracked concrete. Headlights illuminated movement in the trailer's rear view, pale arms sliding across steel floor rivets, limbs jerking as though worn by invisible corpses. My breathing hitched. I forced my foot down harder, engine roaring, praying the wheels would bite. The trailer jackknifed behind me when I hit the highway. I glanced again. The bundles had spilled across the trailer's width, rolling with each bump, arms outstretched as though reaching for the walls. I wanted to stop, wanted to keep looking, but instinct overrode curiosity. I blasted down the black ribbon of road as the hum overtook the cab, rattling the doors. The GPS blinked and recalculated, pointing toward some cluster of farm roads that led nowhere. My eyes burned. Sweat trickled down my collar. I tried my phone, no signal. My radio spat static and laughter. A child's giggle? My knuckles whitened. On the steering wheel. Then one of the bundles rose to its full height, limbs elongated until its arm slipped between the trailer gates like a pale, grasping branch. I jolted awake and yanked the wheel, veering off into a field of brittle stubble. The truck fishtailed, then ground to a halt, engine still blaring. I leaped free, chest heaving, and ran around to the trailer's back. The gates swung open on silent hinges. Inside, the hum ceased and the beam from my flashlight found nothing. No pallet, no bundles, no footprints. Just empty wooden slats glimmering under the moon. I closed the gates, hands shaking so hard I dropped the light. I scooped it up, shone it through the cracks. My breath caught. Scrawled in what looked like dried sap along the trailer's farthest wall were words. We found our way home. The letters oozed in thick rivulets. I stepped back. My phone buzzed, one missed call from an unknown number. I answered. A voice I recognized turned my blood cold. It was Marlene. She whispered, "Do you see them? They're with you now." Then the line went dead. I stumbled toward the cab. As I reached for the door handle, the humming returned, low and triumphant. My radio crackled. "Hey, rookie. Nice haul." Then static. Then silence. I shut the door and locked it. I eased the truck into reverse, heart pounding, and crawled away. But I already felt something on the seat beside me, cold and fleshless breathing. And somewhere in the darkness, the manifest registered a new entry. Destination. Wherever you dare not go. Cargo. We're here. I could feel the asphalt humming under my wheels before I even saw the sign. Mile marker 92, blinking its tired orange glow through the humid Texas night. My rig's tires drummed against the blacktop like a heartbeat, and somewhere outside, the cab, an insistent cicada chorus, flared and faded in the dark. I'd been running low on fuel for miles, my gauge flirting with empty, and the promise of a backroad exit was too good to pass up. Trouble was, it wasn't on any map I'd ever studied. There was no placard, no painted name, nothing but a battered metal arm shielding a battered wooden post that leaned like a drunk against the roadside. I slowed and tapped the brakes. The rig protested, a low, startled rumble, but turned onto that broken concrete spur with a groan. The trees closed in fast oak and mesquite swing in the heat so still you'd think they were carved from stone. My headlights cut twin swaths of yellow into the blackness. The dash lights glowed, and for a moment I thought I saw something flicker in the trees. A human shape thrown against bark, sliding down like smoke. I blinked, and it was gone. No fuel station waited at the end of the ramp, just a narrow double track disappearing deeper into shadow. But I'd smelled gas fumes leaking from the tank since El Paso. I needed to find help. I eased forward, steering. With one hand, coffee cup in the other. My radio squawked static. The dial hunted channels like a trapped mouse. No CB chatter, no welcome voices, nothing but the hiss of the air through the vents. I told myself it was nothing. A ghost story my dad would tell back on the ranch. Nothing more than a cow skull hanging in someone's yard, backlit by a flashlight. But my knuckles squeezed the steering wheel, white-knuckled. The rig rattled, each link of drive shaft jostling like bones in a coffin. I squared my shoulders, forced my jaw loose, and drove on. About 200 yards in, the gravel track opened onto a clearing lit by a single flickering lantern suspended from a dead mesquite. Beneath it sat an ancient pump, rusted handle frozen at half-mast. No hose, no meter, just a pump. Next to it, slumped in a wooden chair, sat an old man wearing a brimmed hat that drooped low across his face. His shoulders jerked in short, dry coughs. The lantern flame guttered, casting his face in strabbing shadows. Cheekbones like broken glass, skin ashen and taut. "Evenin'," I called from the cab. My voice cracked. The man jerked his head up. His eyes were pools of liquid black, each iris a pitch-dark pit. They leaked something dark and wet that ran in rivulets down his cheeks, soaking the collar of his shirt. His mouth opened in a lipless grin, and the sound that came out wasn't a cough anymore. It was a moan that crawled under my skin. I killed the engine. Silence pressed in so hard I thought it might crush me. The cicadas stopped. The lantern flickered low, then gave a final, venomous gasp and went out. The clearing sank into darkness. I sat frozen, every nerve screaming, every muscle locked. The old man's moan rose behind me, low, liquid, like sorrow skinned raw. I shouldn't have left the cab. I should have backed out right then. But something about that twisted grin drew me. I climbed down, boots crunching gravel, the beam of my flashlight carving a path through the black. Gravel cracked underfoot so loud it felt wrong. I raised the light to the man's face. His hat was off now, and his head was bald, shining like bone. His eyes bled black oil that dripped onto his lap, splattering in dark puddles. "Help me," he croaked, voice raw. "Help me turn back." His finger trembled toward the rig. I looked where he pointed. The exit sign, half buried in weeds now, glimmered in my shotgun mirror. "Back," he whispered, the words sliding into my gut like an icicle. It wasn't supposed to happen. My throat seized. I turned my head, and for a moment the darkness behind me seemed to reach in and wrap around my shoulders. A voice in the shadows called my name, low and ragged as wind through a graveyard. I spun back. The old man's mouth dropped open. The edges of his lips started peeling back, as if more jaw was forming beneath. His eyes widened, and the black ooze poured faster his tears of tar. I stumbled back. "No," I told him. "No, I can't." My voice died. I couldn't explain why I felt compelled to keep moving forward, why my boots carried me past the pump and toward where the trees darkened again. Leaves brushed my arms like cold hands. The moon wove through the canopy, revealing shapes that weren't trees, 3 skeletal forms, shoulders hunched, leaning toward the path. Too tall for men, too crooked for beasts. A whispering started then, all around me. Soft, hissing syllables that slid beneath the gravel into my boots. My skin prickled. My heart pounded, a hammer in my ears. The shapes pressed closer. My flashlight flickered, then died, leaving me in a hollow of pure black. Pitch that drank the moonlight whole. I floored it. My boots clipped stones. I heard a scuttling behind me, branches tearing, snapping ribs of saplings. My breathing ripped in my chest. And then I saw it, deep in the gloom, a jagged break in the underbrush, like a shattered doorway leading to night itself. I lunged for it, arms out, and fell through. I hit asphalt smooth and hard and rolled. My flashlight clattered away. Moonlight revealed a deserted 2-lane blacktop and an exit sign. Dead man's turnoff, letters dulled and warped. My rig was idling at the berm, lights on, engine burbling. I scrambled up, blood pounding in my ears. I caught a glimpse in the rear view. At the edge of the clearing stood the old man, silhouette bowed. His bleeding eyes reflected my headlights, 2 shining coals of pleading desperation. "Go back," he called, voice swallowed by distance. "There's no going back." I jerked in the seat, slammed it into gear, and peeled onto the highway. The trees flew past. The miles dropped off under the tires, but behind me, always just behind, the headlights caught something crawling across the road, something with too many legs and too many eyes, eyes that twinkled red beneath the trailer. Wheels. I didn't stop until the moon sank below the horizon and the sky drew pale at dawn. I limped into the next town, rig smelling of burnt brakes and something sweet and heavy like decay. I parked in the yard of a rundown service station. I sat there, hands trembling, waiting for the sun to climb. The mechanic looked at me like I'd driven in off another world. He shook his head at the exit sign painted on the pump house. Dead man's turnoff? Nobody's used that road in years. They sealed it off after the crash. I blinked. Crash? He nodded. Oil tanker blew a tire on the ramp, went off into the woods. Truck went down, an embankment tanker ruptured, fuel spilled, lit up everything. Driver never got out. Burned right on the spot. I swallowed hard. When was that? 20 years ago, this month. I stared at the pump house sign, letters rusted. Turn off. The word dead slanted where someone had tried to paint over it. I ran my hand over the cool glass of my coffee cup and thought of the old man, eyes bleeding oil. And I knew I had passed. That exit before, countless times, always too tired or too stubborn to turn. Now I'd turned. Now I'd gone. And I'd never be able to reverse course. He'd been hauling a load of refrigerated cabbages from Lubbock to Beaumont, a run he'd done so many times that the road felt carved into his bones. It was past midnight when he dropped off his last pallet and eased back onto Highway 69, where the ribbon of asphalt snaked through stretches of mesquite and scrub. The cab was silent, save for the low hum of the engine and the hiss of the tires on the blacktop. Outside, the moon was a lip of silver sliding behind ragged clouds, and the world was empty, wide, indifferent. He checked his side mirror, no headlights behind him. He ticked the switch, warming the glass, and leaned forward to peer again. That's when he saw it. Another driver pacing him, tailgate to taillight, but no rig mirrored in his peripheral. Nothing in the blind spot, nothing on the side of the road, no standing cab or tractor beam of light. Just the illusion in the glass. The phantom rig, its chrome grille catching a glint, its trailer a dark shape as thin and perfect as a cut vein. For a moment he thought it was a prank. Some local prankster with a hollow shell of a rig made from plywood and scrap metal. But then he recognized the driver in the reflection, his own face, pinched and pale, the stubble dark under his chin, the tired eyes rimmed with red, and that grin. He jerked his head, fingers tight on the steering wheel, sure that when he looked over his shoulder there would be nothing, but there was only highway and mesquite and tumbleweeds chasing the wind. He glanced back at the mirror. The grin widened, more teeth than a human jaw should carry, each one sharp and stained like partial shards of sick bone. The reflection's head tilted, slow, deliberate. His reflection had no rig, but it had time to play. He stomped the brakes, felt the rumble of the trailer jackknifing under the sudden shift, and skidded to a stop. The lights of his cab flooded the shoulder, pale and flickering as if wavering in fear. He killed the engine. The humming stopped. Then the hiss of escaping. Air from the brakes sounded like a whisper. Come closer. He didn't want to look again. He wanted to believe this was a mirage caused by the cold, the friction of the brakes, the fatigue pressing against his skull like a vice, making his mind betray him. But his hands were shaking so hard that gripping the wheel felt impossible. Rational thought was a distant memory, a faded signpost swallowed by the blackness ahead. He rubbed his eyes and forced himself to look. The rig in the mirror was gone, replaced by the usual dark blur of highway. He exhaled, a breath that trembled through his lungs. He took off his heavy gloves and slid them onto the dash. With his bare hands he reached for the mirror switch and flicked it off. The glass chilled instantly, its surface freezing until it was opaque. He leaned back, pressing his head against the seat, letting the weight of the night bear down on him. That's when he heard the tapping, faint at first, like fingernails rubbing on metal. It came from the roof of the trailer, a heartbeat off enough to sound wrong. He flicked on the overhead light. It stabbed through the darkness, illuminating the inside of the cab in harsh white. The tapping stopped. He told himself it had been a bird trapped in the undercarriage or a loose panel rattling in the wind. Anything but the thing he'd seen. He flipped the sleeper door open and climbed into the narrow berth, wrapping the quilt around his shoulders. His phone was dead. He'd forgotten to charge it during the drop. No radio, no CB. His only connection to the outside world was that mirror and the silence it concealed. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but every time he drifted toward oblivion, the tapping returned, a nail against steel, rhythmically slow, beckoning. He thought of his wife, sleeping soundly at home in San Antonio, unaware of the shape. Crouched on the roof behind him. He tried to imagine daylight, the sun burning away the shadows, but the memory of that grin chased any warmth away. By the time the clock in his head clicked past 2, the tapping was so loud in his ears that he felt it in his bones. He couldn't bear it anymore. He threw back the quilt, stomped across the floor of the cab, and yanked open the sleeper door. He climbed into the trailer, the dark belly of it swallowing him. His flashlight lay at his feet. He clicked it on and swept the beam across the stacks of crates. Frost glistened along the metal ribs, and his breath smudged in the beam's wake. The tapping was deafening here, a thump, thump, thump above his head. He raised the beam to the ceiling and saw footprints, muddy and small like a child's, leading down the length of the trailer to the far doors. How could a child or anything have climbed this height? His heart thundered in his chest as he backed away, tripping over a wooden pallet and slamming into the crates. The light clattered to the floor, flickering as it rolled. He froze, every muscle coiled. The tapping stopped. He closed his eyes. The truck shivered as if shaken by unseen hands. The metal ribs groaned. The single beam of light cut through the darkness in jerks, and then he saw it, the outline on the ceiling. A face pressed against the thin metal, elongated, a mouth that split too far into a grin, teeth pressing on the roof so that the metal dented under the pressure. The beam danced across that face, and for a moment it looked alive, hungry. He screamed and stumbled back toward the open trailer door. He tumbled out into the cab, slammed it shut, and locked it with shaking fingers. He half remembered the cab door's key sliding in the lock. That click became a prayer. He crouched behind the driver's seat, hugging his knees, and watched. The trailer's backside in the rearview mirror. The black doors were still. The moonlight slashed diagonally across them, and nothing moved. He waited for hours. Eventually, the sky began to lighten, and the shape of dawn crept across the horizon, pale blue turning to gold. He dared to peek out. The rig was idling on the shoulder, wheels straight, engine off. He started the engine, the roar filling the silence. He inched forward onto the highway. The frost on the trailer melted in the first touches of sun. By the time he crested the rise near the crooked windmill farm, the road stretched empty ahead. No sign of that rig behind him. He looked in the side mirror. It was just road and sky. Relief washed through him until the glass clouded over, and he couldn't see. He switched it off. For a long moment he drove blind. Then, when the sun was high, he opened his thermos and took a sip of coffee. The bitter warmth burned down his throat. He told himself it was all in his head, a bad dream born of frostbite and isolation. Yet even now, when he lies in bed at night, sometimes he catches a glimpse of a grin in the glint of a car's side mirror as he drives past. He tightens his grip on the wheel, remembering the mirror that didn't lie, and prays that this time, whatever it was, stays behind. The hum of the engine was a dull drone in his skull, a steady heartbeat beneath the roar of tires on asphalt. The night was bone black except for the dull glow of his headlights and the scattered pinpricks of distant taillights staggering ahead like fireflies caught in a jar. He'd left Fort Worth 4 hours ago, bound east on Interstate 20 toward Tyler. But by now the lights of civilization had dropped away, leaving him in a void of empty lanes and silent mile markers. Mile 326 passed without a flicker. Then 327, and with it the faint wisp of something like smoke drifting across the pavement. He blinked, wondering if his eyes were playing tricks in the dark dot by mile 329. The smoke had coalesced into a dark stain along the shoulder, patching the asphalt with a slick that glistened red in his beams. He eased off the gas, the semis. Great Dane hood ornament bobbing up and down, and squinted at the stain. It looked like spilled oil, thick and congealed, but as he rolled past, the red sheen crept across his vision and his lips turned parched. Beneath the glow of the headlight, it smelled coppery, like the tang of blood on a fresh cut. He drove on, heart hammering. As if the stain had sunk its claws into him. At mile 331, the rumble strips tapped out a staccato warning under the tires. He yanked the wheel, dragging the rig into the breakdown lane. breathing hard behind the tinted windshield. When he killed the engine, the silence was a hammer blow. No sound save the distant whoosh of a chain across metal, as though something dragged itself along the guardrail behind him. He squeezed the door handle, but hesitated. The night felt alive, its breath on his neck. He waited, and whatever had moved ceased as abruptly as it began. He sat for a long minute, trying to calm the tremor in his limbs. Then he pried open the door and stepped onto the cool asphalt. His boots settled into the tar, gritty and warm. He crouched beside the right front wheel to inspect the red smear. It was slick to the touch, and when he rubbed his fingertip across the black tread, a smear of crimson coated his glove. He lifted it, the red smear catching the moonlight that peeked above the horizon for a moment, and he stifled a gag. He blinked, and it was gone. His glove was clean, sterile rubber, no different from before. He stood, shaking his head. Hallucination, he told himself. Fatigue. He'd been hauling refrigerated produce since dawn, pushing to make the eastbound drop before first light. He climbed back in, started the engine, and eased onto the road again. The rig lumbered forward, and the mile markers rolled by 332, 333, 334. At 335, the taillights of a Cadillac flickered into view far ahead, but when he blinked, they vanished. He leaned on the horn twice, nothing answered. He cursed under his breath and pressed on. Somewhere beyond Odessa, the highway straightened out, and an unending stretch of black ribbon lay before him. Mile 342 came, then 343, and beside the marker, as if carved into the shoulder, a shape crouched low. He slammed the brakes, tires screaming. The rig shuddered to a halt just inches from the shadow. He peered over the grill guard, but saw nothing. No body, no animal, no hail of debris, just the night, pitch and empty. Then the shape rose, tall and hunched, flesh slack. Its arms dangled, fingers dragging on the ground. He froze, bragged, watching the thing straighten to its full height. Pale, pocked skin that gleamed strangely in the headlights. Its head tilted, and for a heartbeat he thought he saw his own face in its slack jaw and hollow eyes. Then it turned its head, and the engine sputtered in his throat. The thing raised an arm, pointed down the highway. He followed its bony finger to a cluster of taillights swirling in the distance. Like embers bobbing on a breeze, something clattered. Behind him, he yanked his door open, spun around, but only saw the empty shoulder, the desert brush swaying in a breeze he couldn't feel. He dove back into the cab, slammed the door, and roared away, hands white on the wheel. His rig surged forward, the speedometer climbing past 80. Behind him, the shape melted back into the darkness. Ahead, the road dipped into a shallow canyon. Mile 344 flashed by, and at the edge of the drop, a lone pickup lurked, braking lights glowing like a warning. It was battered, the bed twisted, doors torn off. He had to brake hard. The rig jackknifed, and he felt the hot press of tires meeting pavement. When he glanced to the right, the pickup's cab was empty, blood-red handprints smeared across the back window. He couldn't tell if they were fresh or long-dried, but the scent of iron was suffocating. He jerked the wheel and swerved into the left lane, embankment rushing past. The rig fishtailed, then straightened as he tugged on the shifter. In his rearview mirror, the pickup was gone. No headlights, no wreckage. Just the curving asphalt, garlanded by the dim lights of Crandall and Record. It was as if the road had swallowed the thing whole. He swallowed hard, mouth paste dry. He willed himself to breathe evenly, tried to make sense of the impossible. Then his radio crackled to life. A voice sputtered with static, begging for help. He recognized the freight dispatcher's voice, but it was torn, hollow. Words dragged like they'd been underwater. He He reached for the mic. "This is Hammer 67. I need," but before he could finish, the voice screamed, a shrill, animal wail that rattled the cab. It said, "You shouldn't have come back. Been cut out?" His blood ran cold. He checked the logs on the dash. He was on schedule, no reroute orders. He killed the radio and pressed on, but the highway felt different. The horizon curved as though the night itself had shifted. Mile marker 346 came into view, and beneath it, painted in blood, the words, "Turn around." His knuckles went chalk white. He blinked. The paint looked new wet in the beam of his headlights. He pressed the accelerator, but the engine choked, jerking the rig to a halt. The dashboard lights flickered, then died. Only the high beams cut through the darkness, and in their beam he saw the road behind him stretching to the vanishing point, a yawning maw of black. But on the shoulder, clustered where the breakdown lane should be, were dozens of shadowy forms, crouching, motionless. He slapped the dash with the heel of his hand, praying for the engine to turn over. On the third twist of the key, it groaned and caught. He lifted off the brake, but the road was blocked. The shapes stepped forward, one by one, revealing bodies in twisted poses. A woman whose leg lay bent beneath her, a man whose skull was caved in, others too mangled to tell. Their eyes were pits of nothingness. They stood as if waiting. In the mirror, he saw the cab lights fade. The high beams remained, but the area around the rig went pitch. He craned his neck to peer behind. The asphalt was stained red, a river of blood collecting in the road center. The bodies turned, tilting their heads to follow him, and their mouths opened in silent screams. He stomped the accelerator so hard the rig lurched, tires spinning, screaming against the tar. The shapes recoiled, as if scorched by the heat, but they didn't vanish. They dissolved into shards of darkness that clung to the wheels and chassis. He punched the horn, unhooked the trailer brake, and felt the rig surge forward. The pickups. Grill guard ripped through the line of bodies, splattering the windshield. He nearly blacked out from the shock, muscles tensing as his heart thundered in his ears. When the rig cleared the canyon lip, the shape stayed behind, pinned to the asphalt, still and bloody. Mile 347 rolled by without incident, but the road ahead was clear only for a heartbeat. Then the faint glow of city lights appeared. Tyler sprawled in the distance. Salvation, he thought. He'd made it. He yanked the wheel toward the on-ramp, eager to reach the bright street lamps and call for help. As he rounded the exit, he glanced at the speedometer. 80. He mashed the brake pedal, but the rig coasted forward. The pedal sank to the floorboard, with no resistance. He cursed, jammed the shifter into neutral, tried the emergency brake. It didn't catch. Ahead, the road split. One exit leading into Tyler, the other looping back onto I-20 westbound. The west loop beckoned, the moonlight glinting off the painted arrow pointing that way. A whisper curled through the cab, soft as silk. "Go back." He froze, foot hovering over the brake. His breath rattled. Behind him, through the rear view mirror, the lane he'd left was dark and empty again, free of bodies and blood. Opening night sky, a straight ribbon heading west. He knew what the whisper meant. If he turned back, he'd loop into the nightmare once more, mile markers bleeding, bodies waiting. But if he went on into Tyler, he might reach safety. His foot pressed down on the pedal. The rig shuddered, slowed marginally, then slid onto the side exit toward Tyler. The city lights grew, the pavement smooth and dry. He eased into the street, rolling past shuttered gas stations and empty diners smelling of stale coffee. At the edge of town, a small red neon sign flickered over a repair garage, closed. He rolled to a stop, engine idling, and killed the high beams. The rig sat still, safe, silent. He unclasped his seatbelt, reached for the door handle. Then he saw the smear on the cab's side panel, a long stripe of red that tapered off like a brushstroke. He opened the door, stepped out, and saw fresh footprints leading from the highway onto the cracked concrete. He followed them, each print sinking into a puddle of congealed blood. The smell hit him, then the smell of iron and rot, the scent of bodies decomposing in the sun. The hum of the engine was a dull drone in his skull, a steady heartbeat beneath the roar of tires on asphalt. The night was bone black except for the dull glow of his headlights and the scattered pinpricks of distant taillights staggering ahead like fireflies caught in a jar. He'd left Fort Worth 4 hours ago, bound east on Interstate 20 toward Tyler. But by now the lights of civilization had dropped away, leaving him in a void of empty lanes and silent mile markers. Mile 326 passed without a flicker. Then 327, and with it the faint wisp of something like smoke drifting across the pavement. He blinked, wondering if his eyes were playing tricks in the dark dot by mile 329. The smoke had coalesced into a dark stain along the shoulder, patching the asphalt with a slick that glistened red in his beams. He eased off the gas, the semis. Great Dane hood ornament bobbing up and down, and squinted at the stain. It looked like spilled oil, thick and congealed, but as he rolled past, the red sheen crept across his vision and his lips turned parched. Beneath the glow of the headlight, it smelled coppery, like the tang of blood on a fresh cut. He drove on, heart hammering, as if the stain had sunk its claws into him. At mile 331, the rumble strips tapped out a staccato warning under the tires. He yanked the wheel, dragging the rig into the breakdown lane, breathing hard behind the tinted windshield. When he killed the engine, the silence was a hammer blow. No sound save the distant whoosh of a chain across metal, as though something dragged itself along the guardrail behind him. He squeezed the door handle, but hesitated. The night felt alive, its breath on his neck. He waited, and whatever had moved ceased as abruptly as it began. He sat for a long minute, trying to calm the tremor in his limbs. Then he pried open the door and stepped onto the cool asphalt. His boots settled into the tar, gritty and warm. He crouched beside the right front wheel to inspect the red smear. It was slick to the touch, and when he rubbed his fingertip across the black tread, a smear of crimson coated his glove. He lifted it, the red smear catching the moonlight that peeked above the horizon for a moment, and he stifled a gag. He blinked, and it was gone. His glove was clean, sterile rubber, no different from before. He stood, shaking his head. Hallucination, he told himself. Fatigue. He'd been hauling refrigerated produce since dawn, pushing to make the eastbound drop before first light. He climbed back in, started the engine, and eased onto the road again. The rig lumbered forward, and the mile markers rolled by: 332, 333, 334. At 335, the taillights of a Cadillac flickered into view far ahead, but when he blinked, they vanished. He leaned on the horn twice, nothing answered. He cursed under his breath and pressed on. Somewhere beyond Odessa, the highway straightened out, and an unending stretch of black ribbon lay before him. Mile 342 came, then 343, and beside the marker, as if carved into the shoulder, a shape crouched low. He slammed the brakes, tires screaming. The rig shuddered to a halt just inches from the shadow. He peered over the grill guard, but saw nothing. No body, no animal, no hail of debris, just the night, pitch and empty. Then the shape rose, tall and hunched, flesh slack. Its arms dangled, fingers dragging on the ground. He froze, bragged, watching the thing straighten to its full height. Pale, pocked skin that gleamed strangely in the headlights. Its head tilted, and for a heartbeat he thought he saw his own face in its slack jaw and hollow eyes. Then it turned its head, and the engine sputtered in his throat. The thing raised an arm, pointed down the highway. He followed its bony finger to a cluster of taillights swirling in the distance. Like embers bobbing on a breeze, something clattered. Behind him, he yanked his door open, spun around, but only saw the empty shoulder, the desert brush swaying in a breeze he couldn't feel. He dove back into the cab, slammed the door, and roared away, hands white on the wheel. His rig surged forward, the speedometer climbing past 80. Behind him, the shape melted back into the darkness. Ahead, the road dipped into a shallow canyon. Mile 344 flashed by, and at the edge of the drop, a lone pickup lurked, braking lights glowing like a warning. It was battered, the bed twisted, doors torn off. He had to brake hard. The rig jackknifed, and he felt the hot press of tires meeting pavement. When he glanced to the right, the pickup's cab was empty, blood-red handprints smeared across the back window. He couldn't tell if they were fresh or long-dried, but the scent of iron was suffocating. He jerked the wheel and swerved into the left lane, embankment rushing past. The rig fishtailed, then straightened as he tugged on the shifter. In his rearview mirror, the pickup was gone. No headlights, no wreckage. Just the curving asphalt, garlanded by the dim lights of Crandall and Record. It was as if the road had swallowed the thing whole. He swallowed hard, mouth paste dry. He willed himself to breathe evenly, tried to make sense of the impossible. Then his radio crackled to life. A voice sputtered with static, begging for help. He recognized the freight dispatcher's voice, but it was torn, hollow. Words dragged like they'd been underwater. He reached for the mic. "This is Hammer 67. I need," but before he could finish, the voice screamed, a shrill, animal wail that rattled the cab. It said, "You shouldn't have come back, been cut out." His blood ran cold. He checked the logs on the dash. He was on schedule, no reroute orders. He killed the radio and pressed on, but the highway felt different. The horizon curved as though the night itself had shifted. Mile marker 346 came into view, and beneath it, painted in blood, the words, "Turn around." His knuckles went chalk white. He blinked. The paint looked new wet in the beam of his headlights. He pressed the accelerator, but the engine choked, jerking the rig to a halt. The dashboard lights flickered, then died. Only the high beams cut through the darkness, and in their beam he saw the road behind him, stretching to the vanishing point, a yawning maw of black. But on the shoulder, clustered where the breakdown lane should be, were dozens of shadowy forms, crouching, motionless. He slapped the dash with the heel of his hand, praying for the engine to turn over. On the third twist of the key, it groaned and caught. He lifted off the brake, but the road was blocked. The shapes stepped forward, one by one, revealing bodies in twisted poses. A woman whose leg lay bent beneath her, a man whose skull was caved in, others too mangled to tell. Their eyes were pits of nothingness. They stood as if waiting. In the mirror, he saw the cab lights fade. The high beams remained, but the area around the rig went pitch. He craned his neck to peer behind. The asphalt was stained red, a river of blood collecting in the road center. The bodies turned, tilting their heads to follow him, and their mouths opened in silent screams. He stomped the accelerator so hard the rig lurched, tires spinning, screaming against the tar. The shapes recoiled, as if scorched by the heat, but they didn't vanish. They dissolved into shards of darkness that clung to the wheels and chassis. He punched the horn, unhooked the trailer brake, and felt the rig surge forward. The pickups. Grill guard ripped through the line of bodies, splattering the windshield. He nearly blacked out from the shock, muscles tensing as his heart thundered in his ears. When the rig cleared the canyon lip, The shape stayed behind, pinned to the asphalt, still and bloody. Mile 347 rolled by without incident, but the road ahead was clear only for a heartbeat. Then the faint glow of city lights appeared. Tyler sprawled in the distance. Salvation, he thought. He'd made it. He yanked the wheel toward the on-ramp, eager to reach the bright street lamps and call for help. As he rounded the exit, he glanced at the speedometer. 80. He mashed the brake pedal, but the rig coasted forward. The pedal sank to the floorboard with no resistance. He cursed, jammed the shifter into neutral, tried the emergency brake. It didn't catch. Ahead, the road split. One exit leading into Tyler, the other looping back onto I-20 westbound. The west loop beckoned, the moonlight glinting off the painted arrow pointing that way. A whisper curled through the cab, soft as silk. "Go back." He froze, foot hovering over the brake. His breath rattled. Behind him, through the rear view mirror, the lane he'd left was dark and empty again, free of bodies and blood. Opening night sky, a straight ribbon heading west. He knew what the whisper meant. If he turned back, he'd loop into the nightmare, once more mile markers bleeding, bodies waiting. But if he went on into Tyler, he might reach safety. His foot pressed down on the pedal. The rig shuddered, slowed marginally, then slid onto the side exit toward Tyler. The city lights grew, the pavement smooth and dry. He eased into the street, rolling past shuttered gas stations and empty diners smelling of stale coffee. At the edge of town, a small red neon sign flickered over a repair garage. Closed. He rolled to a stop, engine idling, and killed the high beams. The rig sat still, safe, silent. He unclasped his seatbelt, reached for the door handle. Then he saw the smear on the cab's side panel, a long stripe of red that tapered off like a brushstroke. He opened the door, stepped out, and saw fresh footprints leading from the highway onto the cracked concrete. He followed them, each print sinking into a puddle of congealed blood. The smell hit him then, the smell of iron and rot, the scent of bodies decomposing in the sun. He knelt beside the print, fingers trembling, and pressed a fingertip into the center. The blood was slick and warm, and as he drew it back, the red stain remained embedded in his glove. He stared up at the dark sky, heart staccato. Somewhere, behind him, mile markers rolled past, painting a timeline of horrors he could never outrun. And in the distance, a lone crawler of red stains began to creep across the cracked concrete, inching toward him on silent wheels. He woke to the taste of gravel in his mouth, a small shard of rock bruising the back of his throat as his eyelids creaked open. The moon was a fractured sliver behind city clouds, and the only illumination in the yard came from a distant signal, lamp blinking red like a dying eye. He didn't remember how he got here, only that the train's cargo manifest had been wrong, that someone had slipped into the caboose and then the world went black. Now every muscle burned, and his lungs fought for air and the bitter scent of rust and spilled oil. He pushed himself up on trembling arms. The chainmail gloves he always wore for handling spikes lay several feet away, tangled in barbed wire. His boots were missing, and instead his bare feet pressed into sharp stones, bleeding in silent protest. He rose unsteadily, every joint screaming. That was when he heard it, a rasping clatter, the drag of metal on gravel. It started far off, echoing between steel rails and rusted cars, slow at first, then speeding up. Like a creature awakening, his heart drummed in his ears as he scanned the yard. Empty boxcars loomed like hulking beasts, their sliding doors gaping. Shadows shifted under old switch lamps. The chain dragged again, louder now, coming closer, circling him. He couldn't tell where it started or ended. It seemed to slither around the yards in endless loops. Then he saw them, footprints etched into fresh gravel, each toe print hollow and deep. They began at the rail station's edge, circled his own tracks where his truck had been parked, arced around the tanker cars, and traced back to the place he lay. His own tire tracks formed an imperfect oval, and inside those loops stood footprints smaller than a man's, maybe a child's, but too wide in the heel, too narrow in the arch. A twisted silhouette against the moonlight, a creature balancing on its tiptoes, dragging a chain so long it vanished into darkness. He stepped back, one foot landing on a rail spike. Pain exploded up his leg, and he collapsed against a boxcar. The chain's clatter stopped. Silence slammed into him, thick and suffocating. He tuned his ears for the worst. He heard his own ragged breathing, the faint hum of distant freight engines idling, the drip of water from a broken cistern. And then a child's whisper, low and sibilant, carried on the damp night air. "Come, find me." He froze. That voice had no source, and yet it echoed close enough to send heat rocketing up his spine. "Who's there?" He croaked. His voice cracked like a dry branch. No answer. Only the breath of wind and the chain's soft breathing where the footprints disappeared into the shadows. He forced himself to move, every nerve afire. He limped toward what he thought was the yard's exit, a gap between two gondola cars. His shoulder pressed against rusted steel, scraping away his jacket. Ahead, a floodlight had sputtered on, revealing the far gate chained shut, padlocked heavy and ancient. But the light also caught something else. The chain draped across his path, dull iron links curved like the spine of a great serpent. It lay in the gravel he had just stepped on moments before. The blood on his toes had soaked into the stones, mixing with the dust. And in that smear, he saw footprints that weren't his two small prints leading toward him. He stumbled back as the chain jerked forward, as if pulled by an unseen hand. The metal ground against rock with a tortured groan. He knew then that no mere mortal was dragging that chain. He'd heard the old rumors. Years ago, a boy who trespassed here, crushed between cars, his spirit bound by the chain he once carried. They said his restless ghost circled the yard, dragging that iron link in loops around his killer's tracks, searching for warmth, for a new body to occupy. Rational thought fled. He tore at his trousers, tore at his jacket, looking for anything to defend himself. His fist closed around a loose spike, its head jagged and sharp. He held it like a dagger, knuckles white. He backed away until his spine pressed against the boxcar's dented side. There was nowhere left to run. The chain scrap reached a crescendo. A heavy link clattered inches from his boot. He looked down and saw a foot shapeless beneath a ragged sock, pale and bone-thin, dragged forward in an inhuman step. The chain swung again, this time hitting the metal car with a clang that rattled his teeth. He raised the spike and held it before him, waiting, breath caught in his chest. A pale hand emerged from the darkness, fingertips brushing the chain. It was a child's hand, though the fingers were unnaturally long, skin slick and pallid. It pulled the chain to wind again, pulling it taut. The chain's length vanished into the void. He heard breathing wet, rattling, as if through a mouthful of gravel. He waited for the next step, but nothing. Then, slow and deliberate, the hand reached out toward him. He swung the spike, but it passed through the hand as if it were smoke, and pain blossomed in his palm. He screamed and dropped the spike, clutching the wound as the child's voice whispered, "You belong to me." Then the world tilted. His legs were seized by cold arms, lifting him off the ground. He kicked and thrashed, but the cold was stronger. He was carried toward the chain, and the ground fell away beneath his feet. He felt himself sliding along iron rails, the warmth draining from his body, as the chain wound around his ankles, climbing, coiling like a living thing. He tried to scream again, but no sound escaped. Every breath left him as the chain tightened, binding him to the railway ties. The moon slid behind clouds, plunging the yard into absolute darkness. In that blackness, he felt the small body pressing against his back. He smelled damp hair, the sharp tang of blood dot, and then he heard the whisper, "Loop." The chain tugged, pulling him forward. He was dragged across gravel, past the padlocked gate, kept alive only by the ghost's relentless pull. Each jerk of the chain sent shockwaves through his bones, but his skin was numb. He felt no pain, only an endless drag. The footprints formed in the dirt beside him, replicating the pattern of his own tracks, looping until he couldn't tell which track was his and which belonged to the boy. The chain ground against the stone, the only sound in that boundless night. He realized in the last flicker of awareness that the boy had never left his tracks. He had become them. And somewhere ahead, a set of tire prints awaited, untouched by time, ready for the next soul foolish enough to wander into the yard. He vanished into darkness, his scream swallowed by the gravel and the rails. In the morning, when the yardmaster found the chain coiled neatly around a single pair of boots gleaming, untouched by rust, those boots bore no footprints beside them. The chain lay quiet in the mud as if it had never moved at all. And the yard remained, waiting for the next curious drifter to hear metal grinding across gravel in the dead of night. I rode the last stretch of asphalt like a man doomed to a single purpose, putting as many miles between myself and the bright glare of Odessa as possible. The dashboard clock glowed 2:17 a.m., though I'd stopped trusting that thing years ago. Out here, time blurred with the hum of tires and the hiss of wind against the cab. I was hauling a load of crushed pumpkins to Lubbock Halloween season leftovers no one else wanted. The radio spat out dead static and the occasional sermon from some preacher droning on about the end times. I'd flip it on, listen for a minute, then flick it back to silence. Silence was safer. I passed the first broken phone booth at mile marker 130, its glass shattered into jagged teeth, its handset dangling limply from a frayed cord. I wondered who had smashed it, what panic had gripped them to send a fist or a rock flying through that tiny window. But I felt no real curiosity, just a slow pulse in my temples, like the night itself was pressing its palm against my skull. Beneath the booth, dust tangled in tufts, thick as tumbleweed hair. Beyond, the horizon was a faint seam of black and blue, promise of dawn that never seemed to break dot. As I eased past, the booth whispered. I heard it clearly, "Michael." My name? My own voice made me grip the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. I flicked off my headphones and stared at the booth in the mirror. Empty. The moonlight caught a gleam where glass should have been. I dared a glance over my shoulder. Nothing but highway, flat and yawning, bordered by ghost towns no map marked anymore. I told myself it was the wind. The hollow shape of the booth, the hollow wind. But my heart was pounding its own sermon. Kept going, but the whisper trailed me, riding shotgun in my skull. Michael, Michael, Michael. It sounded distant, like a radio station broadcasting through the crests of dunes. I checked the fuel gauge, half a tank. Plenty to reach Midland, maybe all the way to Abilene if I prayed hard. So I kept driving. At mile marker 142, another booth. This one still had a flickering neon sign overhead, green letters spelling phone, though half the tubes were dead. The handset was missing. The cradle sat empty, cord coiled like a snake waiting to strike. As I slid past, it whispered again, louder this time, shale. A snarling hiss beneath my feet, as if the asphalt itself was calling. My knuckles busted open on the wheel. The taste of blood was coppery and mercifully real. I pulled the rig to the shoulder and killed the engine. The night swallowed me. The moon caught the pumpkin load and the back orange orbs stacked like macabre bowling pins. I peeled off my gloves and stepped into the gravel, the solace of my boots scuffing like soft thunder. Silence fell, thick as velvet. I stared at that booth, heart wild, and called out, "Who's there? Show yourself." My voice flapped empty in the darkness. Then I heard it clearly right behind me, a breath so cold I almost screamed. Michael. I spun, but there was no one. Just the booth and the whispering wind. And that pulse in my head, like someone pounding on a steel drum. My breath caught in my chest. I stumbled back into the cab and slammed the door, jaws clamped tight. I dialed dispatch on the CB, but all I heard was static and a voice I didn't recognize. Me each ale. It droned, warped, coming from the speaker, and then cut out to a scream I felt in my bones. I let go of the mic and sat frozen, eyes on the dark highway, praying the dawn would come. I forced the engine back too. Life, cursing myself for weakness. Headlights carved 2 yellow blades through empty dark. I pulled back onto the road, eyes flicking between the mirror and the pavement, half expecting the silhouette of something hunched on the shoulder, listening. But the booths kept coming, each one broken, each one whispering my name in that same low growl. By mile marker 154, I was shaking so badly I could barely steer. The whisper had grown into a chant, drowning out my thoughts. You can't escape. Michael, you belong. Michael. My phone buzzed in my pocket, my wife trying to reach me. I knew it. I ignored it. She'd worry, but not like I'd worry if I quit driving trucks and came home. My life was these empty miles, these glowing markers of nothingness. I glanced at the rearview mirror, and for a heartbeat I saw a figure behind my trailer. Tall, limbs too long to be human, head hanging low as if listening. The headlights lit the shape until it dissolved into the night like smoke. My heart thundered. I swore aloud and gunned the accelerator. The road swooped and curved, hugging the Pecos River Valley before lifting onto a ridge. The air grew cooler, like ice drifting in a furnace. The whisper started echoing off the hills, phasing between the booths and the sky until it felt like a chorus. Michael, Michael, Michael. As I topped the ridge, the sun cracked. The horizon. Pale light spilled across a field of dead mesquite and oil rigs, long shadows bristling like teeth. Relief washed over me. Daylight would banish whatever had hunted me, but the moment the sun cleared, the chirp of my CB cut through the whisper, a voice high-pitched and frantic. Truck 47, stop, pull over. It was dispatch. I steered onto a dirt pull-off, heart slamming. The whisper fell silent for a breath. The CB speaker crackled, but the dispatch voice had shifted, warping into the same gravelly chant. Michael. You should have stayed, Michael. I yanked the cord from the speaker and ripped the radio apart, tossing it to the floor. Sparks flickered, then died. Silence settled like dust. I sat there, chest heaving, listening for the whisper that refused to die. And for a moment, the only sound was my own blood thrumming. Then, as the sun climbed into a blue sky that promised safety, I heard a faint click behind me. I dared to turn my head, and there it was, the broken handset from the first booth, resting on the passenger seat beside me, the cord draped over the headrest. No one had brought it. It had simply appeared. I reached out, fingers trembling, and the handset sprang to life, crackling with a breathy voice that slid under my skin. Welcome home, Michael. I bolted from the cab, leaving the engine idling. Pumpkins rattling in the trailer like a million skulls laughing. Safe in the sunlit day, I ran without looking back. I knew I'd never haul another mile of asphalt, never answer the road's call again. But as I reached the fence and crossed onto the service road, I felt it behind me, a weight pressing against my heart. The whisper came again, soft as the wind. "You belong to me, Michael." And the broken booth on the shoulder gleamed in the sunlight, waiting. He'd been driving since dawn, the ribbon of asphalt unspooling beneath his wheels like a sinuous snake, breathing exhaust and heat into the air. The sun had burned off by high noon, leaving the world glaring and unforgiving, and still the traffic never ceased. 18-wheelers and sedans sliding past him at warp speed, each one a fleeting specter in his rearview mirror. He'd been on I-20 for hours, heading east toward Tyler, listening to the hum of tires on concrete, the drone of his own heart in his chest, trying not to think about how the desert scrub stretched forever beyond the guardrails. That's when he saw it, a red light pulsing in the distance like a heartbeat in the void. At first he thought it was a taillight, another rig veering off onto the service road, but as he slowed, the light glowed at odd intervals, bright, then dim, then gone altogether, then bright again, as if beckoning him closer. He glanced at his fuel gauge. It read half a tank, and there'd been no exit signs for miles. He tapped the brake, felt the trailer sway, and took the next off-ramp without a second thought, the red pulse guiding him like a lighthouse in a storm. Off-ramp curved away from the highway, peeling them off into a narrow strip of cracked pavement that wound between low dunes and scrub oak. The beacon grew brighter, its pulse more insistent, and he rolled down the window to let in the smell of hot metal and dust. He radioed dispatch to say he'd hit a snag, but the CB spat back only static and a faint hiss, as if someone had left. The mic open in an empty room. The road ended at a broad clearing 50 yards across, littered with skeletons of rigs long since abandoned, rusted exteriors bleached by sun, frames half buried in wind-blown sand, tires gnawed to shreds by time. He parked under the glow of the red beacon, which hovered mid-air like a macabre orb, pulsing with unnatural rhythm. He climbed out to inspect it, his boots crunching on broken glass and twisted metal scraps, heart pounding so loud he thought the world would hear it. Up close, the light looked like a lantern old-fashioned, with ribbed glass panels thick with grime. It swayed slightly, though no breeze moved across the clearing. He reached out to touch the metal handle and froze. The heat radiating from it burned his fingertips, scorching the skin before he yanked his hand back. He watched as the light's pulse seemed to slow, then stutter, then speed up again, and he felt a vibration beneath his feet like the earth itself was breathing. He shivered, glanced back at his cab, but when he turned, the trailer door was half open, revealing nothing but darkness deeper than midnight, even though the sun still hung high above. Fear coiled in his gut, and he took a step backward, but the lantern's glow caught his eye, drew him closer. Hypnotic. He shook his head and backed away, but the beacon seemed to follow, drifting toward him on some invisible current. The air chilled, and he saw his breath fog in front of his face, though the temperature hadn't changed. He found his radio again and tried to call dispatch, but now voices poured through the static, faint, distorted, many voices whispering words he couldn't make out. They spoke in a chorus of murmurs, rising to a cacophony that made his ears ring. The red light pulsed faster, flickering between deep crimson and bright scarlet, and he felt his vision swim. He took a step back, stumbled over a rusted axle, and fell against the hood of a shattered cab. His heart hammered, his hands shook, and for a moment the world went silent. Then came the laughter low, gravelly, so close it felt like it was being whispered in his ear. He wheeled around, eyes darting, but there was nothing but the lantern floating before him, its light throbbing like a vein. The laughter subsided into sobs, ragged and sorrowful, and he realized the voices on the radio had become clearer. Please. For help, cries of agony, names repeated over and over, drivers who'd vanished, families who'd waited in vain. He recognized a voice, a dispatcher he'd worked with weeks ago, her tone frantic, pleading. He'd heard she'd died in a rollover out on this very stretch. His knees gave out and he slumped to the ground, watching as the red beacons glow cast long shadows over the field of wreckage, turning each twisted shell into a monstrous silhouette. He wanted to run, but his body refused to obey. Instead, he crawled backward, the lantern hovering mere inches from his face, its light searing his eyes. In its pale warmth he saw his own reflection, twisted, pale, eyes wide with terror, and in that reflection, behind him, came movement. Figures stepping from the shadows, gaunt shapes in soot-stained coveralls, faces drawn and empty, like cadavers pulled from shallow graves. They drifted forward in silence, arms outstretched, mouths opening in silent wails. He pressed himself against the hood of the cab, but it offered no comfort. The figures surrounded him, a semicircle of phantom truckers, each one bearing the faded company logos of long-defunct carriers. Their eyes hollow sockets filled with the lantern's red glow fixed on him as if he were prey. He bolted upright and fled. Across the clearing, boots slipping on sand, arms pumping, chest heaving. Behind him, the laughter began again, growing louder as he pounded toward his rig. He did not look back until he reached the trailer's door, yanking it shut and bolting it against the darkness. He climbed into the cab, slammed the door, and fumbled for the keys, hands slick with sweat. His fingers found the ignition, and he turned it, wheels spinning in the sand as he aimed for the broken stretch of off-ramp. When his rig lurched back onto the highway, the sun was sinking, fire on the horizon, and the red beacon was gone, vanished like a bad memory. He kept driving through dusk and into night, radio silent except for static, no sign of dispatch, no reassurance. He wondered if he'd imagined it all, the lantern, the voices, the phantom drivers. But as he cleared the hills outside Tyler, he glanced again in his mirror and saw a glow in the distance, red and pulsing, beckoning. And he knew then that those souls were still out there, stranded between life and death, waiting for the next rig to stray into their cursed field. He pressed his foot to the accelerator, heart pounding, trying to put as much distance between him and that place as he could. But he knew that no matter how far he drove, a part of him would always be marked by the red beacon, a light that never truly fades, a call he can never escape. He pulls into the blinking neon halo of exit 34 just as the sun sinks behind the scrubby pines, its last orange tongue licking the grease-stained canopy over the pumps. The sign, half stripped of paint, reads Big Jim's Fuel and Snacks, though no one remembers a Big Jim ever working here. He climbs down from the cab, boots crunching over dead grass and broken shards of glass that twinkle like malignant fireflies in the headlights. The air smells of stale coffee, burnt rubber, and something else he can't name something sweet, like rotten apples. As he crosses the puddled asphalt, his radio crackles a warning he doesn't understand. Static. Then a child's laughter so distant and hollow it might as well be coming from the next county. He blinks and it's gone, swallowed by the hiss of the night. Inside, the fluorescent bulbs buzz and flicker, each stutter sending shadows dancing past the rows of candy bars and sodas. The clerk, slouched behind the counter, barely registers. His presence just a shallow nod, like a ghost too tired to haunt. He fills his thermos with coffee that tastes of ash and regrets, glances at the ancient restroom door where the paint peels in layers like skin. When he turns back, the laughter is closer, audible even over the dull hum of the freezer. It sounds like children running, their bare feet slapping against pavement, shrieking in delight. His throat tightens. There shouldn't be children here. The lot outside is empty, or so he thought. He steps back into the cooling night, locking the door behind him. The cracked pavement slopes toward an empty field where rusting trailers lie half buried in kudzu. Just beyond them, he He sees movement. Small shapes flickering in the gloom like leaves caught in a breeze. He squints, heart hammering. 2 children, a boy and a girl, maybe 6 or 7, chasing each other between the trailers. Their clothes are ragged, stained with dirt and something darker, and when they laugh, their voices echo off the metal like a chorus of torn ribbons. They're just silhouettes now, gray and insubstantial, as if painted onto the night. He lifts a hand to wave, to call out, but the moment his fingers brush the air, they vanish, slipping through the world like smoke. He shouts, real panic slicing through him, "Hey!" But the only answer is wind stirring the weeds. He marched forward, boots splashing through oily water, and the children spin to face him. Their faces are empty hollows, no features at all, and they stare with the blank eyes of the forgotten. The laughter starts again, higher now, triumphant and cruel, ricocheting off the bulldozed wrecks of semi-trucks that form a broken skyline. He stops 5 feet away, breath hollering in his chest. He reaches out, fingertips trembling, but the figures blur and waver as if the night itself rejects their presence. He swears he sees tears, tiny rivulets of something glistening in the hollow sockets of their eyes. Then they dissolve into motes of dust that swirl around him like a gale. His pulse thunders. He staggers back toward the truck stop, each step heavier than the last, as though the asphalt itself resists his flight. Inside again. He leans against the counter, gasping for air. The clerk glances up, unconcerned. "You okay there, driver?" He asks without interest, rewinding the scratchy ballad playing on the old jukebox. He nods numbly, scoops up his coffee, and pushes through the door. Back in the cab, he flicks on the dome light and stares at the rearview mirror. The seat behind him is empty, except for a fine layer of dust that wasn't there before, and streaks of muddy footprints leading from the sleeper bunk to the door. He sweeps a hand across the glass, but the dust clings to his fingers like cold ash. His radio crackles again, louder this time, and the child's laughter pours through the static, so clear he can hear the short, ragged breath between giggles. He yanks the mic, but all that comes out is another heartbeat of static. He slams the door, throws the truck into gear, and the engine roars to life like a creature awakened. Under the jeering neon of the sign, he peels away, back onto the highway, tires spitting gravel. The field and the trailers recede in his mirror, and the laughter fades into the night only to be replaced by a new sound, tinny, distant, like a child humming a lullaby. The world presses in, dense and alive, and he knows he can drive for hours, days, even weeks, but he'll never outrun the echoes at exit 34. They'll wait for him wherever he stops next. Voices promising play, promising laughter, and when he turns to find them, they'll stretch their hands toward him and vanish just out of reach until he's the one haunting the darkness, a ghost in search of the next lost child who beckons him home. He'd been watching the sun sink behind scrubby mesquite for hours, the heat haze rippling across the cracked asphalt like a promise of delirium, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of that mile marker. Rusted orange numeral 66. 6 shone faintly in the dying light as though painted in dried blood. He eased the big rig to a crawl, its engine's cough echoing off the flat horizon, and glanced back at the faded sign again, half expecting someone in a leather jacket and mirrored shades to step from behind it and laugh. But there was no one. Only the effort to swallow the last day's worth of dust and keep his hands from shaking. He'd been on this stretch of Highway 68 every night for a month, running freight from Dallas to Eagle Pass, but he'd never seen a marker like this. At all. He flicked the blinkers, leaned into the driver's door, and tapped the metal post as if it might crumble apart like old chalk. His knuckles stung. The number was real. When he'd passed every other worn concrete slab, the 664s and 665s, his GPS had hummed on autopilot, guiding him south, but at 666 the screen went black. His radio waves shattered into static, the dial spinning hopelessly like an out-of-control carnival wheel. The dash lights flickered, then winked out. Everything died except the headlights and the trembling beat of his heart. He punched the key. Again. The engine turned over with a dull groan, but the dash stayed dead. Then the GPS reanimated, rebooting into something he couldn't have imagined even in a fever dream. The map was no longer a grid of roads but a swirling red-black landscape. Rivers of fire cutting across blocks of charred earth, tiny symbols he recognized as wings, hooves, snakes. His thumb hovered above the touchscreen. A message glowed in hellish white type. "Welcome to the last mile." He spat and stabbed at the screen, but the map zoomed in on one lonely icon, his truck hovering at the edge of some infernal abyss. A compass needle spun crazily. The tagline. Below it read, "Go on." He slammed his fist into the dash. "Screw this," he muttered. Whatever truck stop coffee and fast food burritos had fueled him tonight, they weren't worth this. Panic tasted like gun metal in his mouth, and he slid out of the cab to kick at the tire. He wanted to run back to his rig, punch through the digital illusion, and keep rolling. But when he swung around, the sky had turned the color of bruise, and the horizon had folded in upon itself like a curtain drawn too close to the stage. A low wind picked up, carrying a scent of sulfur and something else like coppery blood. He fumbled for his phone. No signal. He cursed the dead battery icon that glowed faintly at the top of the screen. Then a shriek ripped through the still. Air, a sound like someone scratching on broken glass with fingernails of bone. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, from behind the frame of the mile marker, from the trees, from the belly of the highway itself. He backed away as the wind intensified, swirling dust at his boots. The trees grew gaunt, their branches twisting into shapes that looked like pleading hands. The sky pulsed with a sickly orange glow. He felt drunk with fear. He reached for the door handle, but the rig's key wouldn't turn. The lock clicked. Strangely, like teeth snapping shut. He yanked again. The metal shuddered. He heard laughter behind him, children's laughter, high and reedy, delighting in some cruel game. He spun and saw, half hidden beyond the trees, small silhouettes dancing in the dust, their forms too tall, too thin, limbs bending at impossible angles. They wore ragged clothes that fluttered like torn flags, their faces blurred in the dusk. "Stop." "It," he whispered, but the voices only giggled louder, echoing off the desert floor. He tried the door again, and it swung open of its own accord. The rig's interior was black, the seats slick with something wet. He jerked back, breathing hard, and the laughter cut out as abruptly as a switch. In the mirror he saw his own face. Pale and drawn, sweat beating at his temples, eyes wide as saucers. He realized then that he'd not been breathing. He choked in air, seconds passing like hours. With shaking limbs, he climbed into the cab and slammed the door. He closed his eyes, willing light back to the dash. When they opened, the GPS map was gone, replaced by a normal grid again, but there was no highway marked. Instead, a thin red line led straight off the screen into a blank void. Below it, typed, in the same ghostly white, were the words, "Don't turn back." His breath hitched. He didn't know who or what had written them, but he sensed they were a threat. Whatever option he had left, turning back wasn't it. There wasn't anywhere else to go except forward. He pulled the rig into gear, accelerator grazing the floor. The truck lurched to life and he barreled onward, leaving the milepost and that silent hellscape behind. The headlights revealed a ribbon of road that seemed endless, disappearing into a haze that tasted of brimstone and dried tears. He kept his eyes on the white line, the yellow markers, the cesium glow of reflectors, but every mile began feeling like an eternity. He glanced at his mirror and recoiled. The back of his cab was gone, replaced by yawning darkness, and from that blackness a long arm crept out, its fingers skeletal, fingertips dragging against the metal and leaving scorch marks. He hit the brakes so hard that his skull snapped against the steering wheel. The rig groaned, the back wheels screeching. Then silence settled again, heavy and expectant. The arm retracted, pulling back through whatever gash it had torn, and his cab snapped back into shape as if nothing had happened. He sat trembling, tears stinging his eyes, sweat slicking his neck. The only sound was his ragged breathing and the hum of the idling engine. He knew he had to keep moving, but every instinct screamed that this road was dead men's road, haunted by something, ancient and starving. He shifted into drive, and the rig surged forward. The GPS flickered one last time, then went dark, replaced by a single line of text. Finish the last mile. He turned his head to look down the road. The darkness ahead wavered, and silhouettes emerged, figures standing at equal intervals, as if marking out a finish line that stretched toward oblivion. Each one looked like a traveler who died out here. Sun-bleached denim, a pickup truck driver with a cigarette burned down to ash in his fingers, a road construction worker bent over a jackhammer that refused to stop pounding. All had eyes that glowed the same dull red and mouths twisted in inhuman grins. The rig's engine groaned again, and the radio crackled to life with a single voice whispering, "Once you cross, you stay forever." The words dripped like venom. A snarl welled up in his chest, fury battling fear, but his foot slammed the pedal. He accelerated toward the first walker, and as he passed, its hand shot out, fingernails dragging across the side of his door, scraping. Sparks. He didn't look back. He barreled on past each figure, the rumble of the engine drowning out their shrieks, until he came to the final silhouette, standing beneath a rusting arch that marked the border, and beyond it, nothing but a fathom. Pitch black void. He drove straight through the arch. The world lurched, his senses rupturing, and for a moment he believed he'd emerged into normal night stars overhead, the distant glow of Laredo's city lights. He exhaled, but then the rig's wheel shuddered and dropped away, and he found himself suspended above that red-black map, the ground melting away beneath him. His heart thundered as the truck nosedived, and he screamed, a raw sound that snagged in his throat. In the instant before impact, the GPS flickered back on, the screen showing one final message: "You're home now." He never reached the border, never reached the end of that cursed highway. The rig plunged into the infinite, and all that remained was the echo of his scream, carried forever on the wind of the last mile marker. He hit the highway just as the sun was folding itself behind the low scrub hills, the sky spilling over them like hot blood. The rattlesnakes' dens under the ancient mesquite trees lay a few miles ahead, and he'd heard the stories long. Stretches of empty asphalt where the ground trembled faintly under your wheels, where the desert inhaled and exhaled in the way a living thing might. He eased the rig past a faded sign that read, "Welcome to Rattler's Bend," its peeling letters promising danger he already felt under his skin. The cab felt too spacious, the engines hummed too loud in his ears. The blue-green glow of the dash lights painted his face in sickly hues as he checked the mirror's endless ribbon of road behind, nothing but dust and heat. The radio crackled, but there was no one listening. He flipped the knob, static swirled and spat, and then silence. Settled thick as molasses. His hands gripped the wheel. The road bent left ahead, curling around a dry wash where rattlers nested in summer, their dens layered under sun-baked rock outcroppings. He remembered a friend's warning. "They say the snakes come out at night and you can hear their rattle echo in your cab." He laughed it off in a joke for long hauls and lonely nights. Now every rolled stone sounded like a shiver, Every gust of wind seemed to carry hissed warnings. The dashboard clock ticked past midnight. Heat trapped in the metal cabin radiated off his skin, but his arms felt goose-fleshed in places. A rattling sound came from the passenger side. A loose piece of metal, he told himself. He glanced down and saw nothing but his boots, dusty and laced tight. He glanced back up and caught his own reflection in the windshield, eyes wide, heart hammering. He put the rig in neutral and rolled. To a stop on the shoulder, the tires crunching over gravel. He killed the engine and sat, listening. The desert seemed to sigh, a breath that whispered his name. The rattling came again, louder this time, and it wasn't loose metal. It was the quick staccato tremor of a tail, the unmistakable percussion of scales vibrating. He fumbled for the interior light, flicked it on, and there on the passenger floor, just past the dog-eared logbook and a half-empty bottle of water, were tracks. Tiny diamond-shaped imprints in dust that shouldn't have been there in this sealed cab. They snaked toward him, curling like the letter S, ending beneath his seat where the light didn't quite reach. He swallowed and reached for the flashlight mounted overhead, fingers trembling so badly he dropped his cigarette lighter. The metal clinked as it rolled under the seat. He fished the lighter out, struck it for a flame that flared too bright, too sudden. The tracks glinted under the light, wet and dark, as though filled with fresh ink. He swept the flashlight beam over the cab floor, and the tracks disappeared into shadows. No way a snake could climb onto the passenger seat, yet here were impressions of scales. Coming right at him, he tried the door handle. Locked. He flung it open, fresh air rushed in, cool and scented of sagebrush. He knelt to inspect the track again, the flame flickering against the confines of cramped space. The mark looked too crisp, too defined, as if pressed by something alive. He slammed the door closed and bolted to the driver's seat, heart firing. Like a pistol shot. Engine fired, headlights punched through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead. Dust plumed behind him. He shifted into drive and stomped the accelerator, rig lurching forward. He barreled past the sign for rattlers. Bend, barely glimpsing the crumbling den entrances carved by centuries of sun and death. The radio crackled back to life. Incomprehensible whispers spat through the static. Words he thought he recognized. "Join us," they hissed, each syllable writhing with something hungry. He jerked the volume knob off. Raw silence swallowed him again. His breathing pounded in his ears. He forced himself to keep moving, eyes darting to the passenger mirror, half expecting to see an undulating form or the glitter of unblinking eyes. But there was nothing. Just the empty expanse of asphalt and the distant promise of open sky beyond. 2 miles down the road, he dared to look down at the floor beneath the passenger seat. Nothing but a scattering of sand from the wash he'd stopped at. He leaned closer. No trace of the tracks, no hint of scales, no sign that anything had been there. His mind raced. Hallucination, exhaustion. Some half-remembered highway tale dredged up by the desert heat. He forced a laugh, more a bark of panic than humor, and cursed under his breath. Then the rig shuddered. He looked up to see the taillights. Ahead standing eerily still, though there was no other vehicle. The highway stretched empty both ways. The shudder came again, a slow, rolling quake, as if the earth beneath him sighed. He grabbed the wheel. The rattling started again low, like a drum, a heartbeat thrumming through the chassis. He pressed his foot down harder. The rig responded. Sluggishly, as if wading through thick syrup, the headlights caught something on the asphalt edge, a curling form that coiled and uncoiled in the beam. His breath caught. A massive rattlesnake, its body thick as his arm, lay half hidden in the shoulder gravel. Its head lifted, tongue flicking. It rattled, the sound amplified in the dark, cracked sky. But he would have accepted that, just another snake crossing the road. he would have run it down, called it a night's misadventure. Instead, that monstrous shape began to climb. Head first, it heaved its heavy coils onto the rear bumper, then inched upward, tongue tasting the steel. He slammed the brakes and lurched sideways, vision blurring. The rig skidded but stayed upright. He reached for the door handle, ready to throw himself out and run like hell across the desert until he collapsed. The door wouldn't budge. As he tugged, headlights swept past him another vehicle, distant, speeding away as though fleeing. He looked back through the cracked rear window. The snake's body slithered over the cab roof, tail dragging behind in the dust. It paused at the top, coils draping over the frame like living drapery. The rattling switched pitch, quicker, urgent, calling. The beast turned its triangular head, eyes gleaming wet under the dim moon. It looked at him. He looked back, paralyzed dot, then the tracks appeared again on the inside of the back window. Tiny scales printed onto the glass, a perfect winding pattern leading into the darkness behind him. He dared a closer look. The temperature in the cab plummeted. Frost bloomed on the edge of the window. His breath condensed into clouds. The rattling stuttered, slowed, then stopped altogether. Silence shattered by a single loud cracked glass, splintering as something hit from the outside. The snake's head smashed through, the blade of its skull screaming shards of glass as it entered. He screamed, gunmetal terror rising in his throat. The snake's massive jaw filled the cab, fangs dripping venom that hissed on the dash. The last thing he saw was his own pallid reflection swallowed in those charcoal eyes as the beast lunged. The rig coasted on, lights out, engine silent, across the empty highway where rattlesnakes hunted under the mesquite. Dawn would find it alone, humming softly under the pink sky, a lone shell waiting for the desert to reclaim it, as though nothing had happened at all. I remember the first time I saw them, the way my headlights carved a tunnel of brightness through the endless night, only to discover that the darkness beyond was alive and breathing. I was hauling a load of feed sacks from Amarillo down past Panhandle, headed for a farm that hadn't paid their bills in months, but still had the gall to call me asking when their shipment would arrive. The highway stretched straight as a rattler's spine, two silver lines cutting through a black sea of grass that seemed to whisper under the truck's rumble. I'd been on the road 12 hours, my eyes gritty, coffee gone cold in the Q folder, and that hum of tires on asphalt was the only thing keeping me company. And then, out past marker 58, I spotted them shadows flickering across the rise. Heads high, silhouettes so unnatural I jerked the wheel, dragging the rig off the pavement and into a cloud of dust. They were a caravan of riders on horseback. 10 of them at least, but not like any riders you've ever seen. Their horses lifted paws as if stepping through molasses, enormous hooves clicking silently on the dirt, and the riders sat ramrod straight, motionless, faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats that swallowed every scrap of starlight. I flicked the brights, trying to make them human, to find a pair of blinking taillights or the chrome of saddles, but the light skidded off them like water off oil and then winked out, leaving only the hush of the plains. For a moment I swore I heard the faint jingle of harness bells, but that was a trick of my mind, or maybe the wind playing at the wires of my rig. I punched the brake and the headlights swung down the road. They'd spread out, ghostly in that narrow band of illumination, spread like vultures waiting for the carcass of my sanity. And then they followed. They set off at a slow trot, the earth beneath them pressed flat and hollow, and despite the hell of a headwind when I finally gunned the engine, the truck fell silent, engine cut by some unimaginable force, the radio sputtering before giving up its ghost. My heart beat a staccato pounding against my chest as though trying to break free, and I rolled the window down, thinking the cold breeze might clear my head. But the air that came in felt warm and fetid, like breath from a creature that had been dead too long. I tried the ignition a dozen times, but all I got was that ugly click. Like the skeleton of my truck had finally said, "Enough." I glanced at my mirrors. The riders moved closer, their heads tilting as if listening for my heartbeat. The horses' eyes gleamed with a sickly light dull pinpricks that burned with hunger. I thought of every tall tale I'd scoffed at in my younger days: phantom stagecoaches, headless horsemen, banshees riding the winds of the prairie, but nothing had prepared me for this. They weren't stories, they were something older, something that had drifted out of memory when the Indians walked these lands and the buffalo grazed in droves. Somewhere in the distance a dog howled, a lone cry that snapped the silence into shreds. The riders quivered in response, collective, as if the sound had touched a nerve. One of them raised a hand, clad in leather so black it drank light, and pointed at me. I could have sworn its skinny fingers ended in claws. At once the rest of them halted, necks craning, horse heads bowed like priests bent in ritual. The ground beneath their feet shivered, and the truck's metal frame resonated with a low hum. I felt it in my bones, that resonance, like the beginning of a drumbeat summoning something terrible. I fumbled for my phone, hands greasy with sweat, but there was no signal, no bars of life to grasp. My breath puffed out in white clouds, even though the air was warm. From somewhere behind me, I heard hoofbeats, heavy and deliberate, but when I spun around, the road was empty. I could taste blood in my mouth, metallic and hot, and panic turned my thoughts into a tangle of broken glass. I reached into the dash for my flashlight, found it, and clicked it on. Flickered its beam across the dirt shoulder, nothing but tire tracks leading back onto the asphalt, and then disappearing into a ring of churned sand, as though the horses had stepped out of this world and back again on some other plane. I pressed my back against the door, breathing so hard my shirt stuck to my chest. The riders glided forward again, horses' legs lifting impossibly high, hooves not touching the ground. They were floating and silent, and every step seemed to echo in the empty vastness. My heart went cold. I remembered my grandfather telling me, in a half-whisper, that the plains had a memory, that the blood spilled here fought to be heard, to be avenged. Buffalo skinned alive, settlers massacred, lynchings carried out under a sky that never blinked. I never believed that as a kid, but now I wondered if those spirits still roamed, gathered into packs of riders seeking justice or simply company. On an endless route through darkness, their leader came close enough that I could see the horse's flanks rippling with muscle, veins like cords of steel. The rider wore a dust-covered duster, and when I caught the edge of movement, I realized. The coat wasn't fabric, but skin stitched into cloth, mottled and rough. The hat brim dipped slightly, and I thought I heard a rasp, like a voice trying to speak but choking on its own words. Then the rider leaned forward, and I saw a hollow where its face should have been, a black cavern and not a scrap of humanity. Behind the brim's shadow, the horse snorted, steam rising from its nostrils, but it was a soundless exhale, like the clacking of bones. I slammed the door lock, fumbling with keys that rattled like dice. The other riders closed in, forming a semicircle around me, their hooves sinking into the earth and lifting without a sound. The headlights flickered once and died, plunging me into a darkness so thick I could taste it. I scrubbed my eyes. The world came back in shades of gray, but I knew it wasn't real. The horses were too tall, too gaunt, too perfect in their unnatural gait. They spread out, and the rider with the duster raised a hand, half in greeting, half in threat, and I saw that the fingers were twisted, knuckled, as if mangled by a cruel smith's hammer. Then it lowered the hand, pointed ahead, back toward the highway, and the circle broke. The horses descended in unison, their hooves touching the dirt and vanishing into the night. My engine roared alive just as they faded, the headlights snapping back on, illuminating the road clear all the way. To Amarillo. The radio burst into static, and the silence after felt like waking from a fever dream. I eased back onto the highway, eyes glued to the mirrors, but there was nothing. No hoof prints, no churned earth, only the two silver lines gleaming in the headlight cone and the planes rolling away, empty as if nothing had ever happened. My pulse thrummed with relief, or maybe it was horror, but I didn't speak a word until I reached the farm. When the owner, Tate, came out in his overalls and asked if I had any trouble on the road, I shook my head, voice caught in my throat. He laughed and slapped the hood. "Old wind out there, I'll play tricks on your eyes," he said. Full moon rising too late at night. I stepped down and rolled my shoulders, trying to shake off the feeling of cold steel, but it stayed in my veins. As I walked around the back of the trailer to open the hatch, I saw them again, 10 figures standing in a line at the fence, hats tipped, backs rigid, horses' heads low. The fence posts cast long shadows in the moonlight, but their forms were solid, unmistakable. My flashlight cut a beam through the darkness, and just for a heartbeat I met the hollow stare of a rider whose face I couldn't see, whose presence sizzled in my mind like an open wound. Then the beam jerked free and caught the siding of the sidings of the barn, and when I turned back, they were gone. I shut the trailer, slammed the latch, and climbed back into the cab. I never said a word about what I saw. I drove away at dawn, the sky bleeding pink, but I swear every freight I've hauled since, every empty road I've rolled down, I feel their eyes on me, hear their hollow whisper on the wind. They're out there, tracing the plains from Amarillo to El Paso, riders too high-stepping and silent to be human, trailing those of us still alive, keeping the score of every life claimed by these wide, lonely lands. And if you ever see them, don't slow down. Hammer the pedal to the floor and never look back, because if they catch you, you'll be just another ghost hitching a ride across the endless night. He eased the rig onto the rural two-lane, the hum of the diesel engine vibrating through the cab like a slow heartbeat. The moon hung low and pale, casting long shadows over the scrub and mesquite lining the asphalt. He knew this stretch highway, 83 between Leakey and Uvalde, like the back of his hand. But tonight, everything felt off. The billboards were dark, the cattle guards silent, and the radio only crackled with static that seemed to whisper, urging him onward. He glanced at the clock. 2:13 a.m. The road was empty, stretching ahead in a ribbon of black. He leaned back, rubbed his eyes, and reached for his coffee mug, half full and lukewarm. That's when he remembered the picture pinned above his dashboard, a snapshot of his wife and daughter, bright smiles in the Texas sun. In the reflection of his side mirror, he thought he saw movement at the edge of his vision, a pale shape, flickering among the trees. But when he checked, nothing was there, just the static hush of the night. He shifted gears and pressed on, the rig's headlights cutting through the darkness. He thought about pulling over at the next rest stop to stretch his legs, but something held him back, an uneasy sensation crawling up his spine. He told himself he was tired, that the road had simply gotten to him. But deep down, he felt watch. 20. Miles later, he hit an incline and crested a rise. Below him, in the glow of his high beams, was a dilapidated truck stop, Fraser's Fuel and Freight. The neon sign hung crooked, flickering half-heartedly. Fazier's FL? Regardless, the pumps were empty, the windows boarded, and not a soul stirred. He slowed, thinking maybe he could use a restroom break. The hours pressed on him. He pressed the brake, and that familiar jolt echoed through the cab, but it didn't bring relief. As he rolled to a stop, an ice-cold draft seeped under the door. Flicked on the rear camera for a clearer view of the sleeper compartment. His own image stared back. Baggy eyes, grease-streaked hair, and a dark t-shirt. For a moment, He thought he saw the fuzz of a breath fog on the tiny window behind his seat, the glass misting as if someone, or something, were exhaling against it. He frowned. The temperature gauge read 76 degrees. Nothing to fog up glass in 76 degrees. He reached up, tapped the camera switch on, off again, but the haze remained as if someone had pressed a hand against the glass from the other side. His heart kicked. He swore he heard a faint scraping noise, like nails sliding against metal. The sound rose and fell, tentative at first, then more desperate. His fist clenched on the steering wheel. He thought of his daughter's laughter, her little feet pattering across the hardwood floors back home. He told himself it was nothing, a loose vent or animal out back. But the scraping grew louder, a slow clawing echo that reverberated inside. The cab, rattling his teeth. Fighting the urge to bolt, he stood and stepped back into the sleeper area. The cab dimmed as the engine idled. He crouched beside the cramped berth, half expecting to see raccoon paws at the translucent divider. Instead, the window wavered with moisture, and against it, the faint outline of a hand long. Slender fingers tapping rhythmically as though in a trance. He flicked on the sleeper light. The outline vanished. The fog dissipated like breath dissipating in the wind. The chilled air disappeared, replaced by the warm hum of the engine and the stale smell of upholstery. He exhaled, wiping sweat from his forehead. He turned back to the driver's seat, telling himself to shake it off, that he just needed to keep moving. But as he slid into his seat, he caught his own reflection in the rearview mirror, only it wasn't his reflection. It was a gaunt face pressed to the glass, eyes wide and hollow, mouth curved in a sardonic grin. A face that was pale as bone, with elongated teeth and skin stretched too tight. He froze, 2 seconds of paralysis before the face flicked away. He whipped around to look again, but there was nothing. The sleeper was empty. His pulse hammered. He slammed the cab door shut and flicked the ignition. The engine roared, and as the rig lurched forward, he skidded the wheel and pulled onto the highway. He accelerated, tires screeching as he launched back onto the dark ribbon of pavement. His hands shook on the wheel, knuckles white in the moonlight. He left Fraser's behind in a blur of spinning wheels and flickering taillights. He put on the CB radio, hoping for a friendly voice, a check-in, anything. Instead, the static spoke again, and through it, the unmistakable sound of a child's whisper, "Don't leave me." He yanked the mic closed, his breath ragged. He risked a glance at the dash. The needle on the speedometer danced at 72 miles per hour. Smooth for a loaded rig, and yet his breaths came in fits. He told himself to calm down, but the whisper came again, soft and pleading. "Please." He hit the brakes hard, skidding in the narrow lane. Gravel sprayed beneath the tires. The whisper turned to sobbing, tiny mournful breaths that curled around his ears. His heart sank. He climbed back into the sleeper, flicking on the light and hurling the partition aside. The berth was empty, no ghostly figure, no pale visage. Just a thin layer of dust on the mattress and the faint imprint of a small hand at the edge. He grabbed the edge of the mattress, searching for something, anything. His fingertips found a scrap of paper tucked between the mattress and frame. He pulled it free. The paper was yellowed and brittle, handwritten in childish scrawl. "Help me. They locked me here." His blood turned to ice. He stuffed the note in his pocket and the camera switch clicked on automatically. The view on the monitor was empty except for the small red glow of the nightlight he'd placed there once on a midnight trip from Amarillo. The light went out, total black. Then, in the blackness, a pair of eyes appeared, tiny, reflective dots that stared him down. They blinked once, slowly, and in that instant, he realized it wasn't a child. It was something older, something cruel. He jammed the camera switch off, slammed the door, and snapped the sleeper partition into place. His vision tunneled. He stomped on the accelerator, hurtling down the highway at 90. The wind whipped past the cab, a furious howl that drowned out his own screams. The road stretched before him, dark and unyielding. Lights flickered on the horizon, welcoming him to Carrizo Springs. But he didn't slow. He couldn't stop. He needed to get away from whatever had climbed inside his sleeper dot. He thought of Texas highways, of the lonely stretches between towns, of the stories truckers told around diners and rest stops about spectral hitchhikers and demons riding shotgun. He never believed them before. Now he prayed they were right, that there was a rational explanation, that he'd wake from a nightmare and find his daughter playing in the yard. But as he barreled forward, the whisper came again, louder this time, directly in his ear. "Don't forget me." It echoed with sorrow and menace, and he realized with a jolt that it wasn't a whisper. It was a voice that had been with him all along. The rig shuddered, an invisible weight bearing down. The headlights dimmed. The engine coughed out. He grasped the wheel, knuckles cracking, and fought to keep control. The road wavered ahead, real and unreal, as if bending around him. He saw another pair of headlights behind, far off but gaining fast. A car? Or something else? His radio crackled. "Breaker 19, you all right?" A rough voice asked. He forced a response. I'm fine. Just running hot. Keep on." The radio clicked off. He exhaled a shaky breath and pushed harder. The rig lunged forward, straining against his will. The whisper followed, insistent and ragged. "Please, come back." He swallowed, tears stinging his eyes. He spun around, yanked the partition away, and the sleeper was filled with dust motes dancing in the moonlight. The mattress lay empty. He reached behind, hands shaking, but found nothing. No eyes, no handprints, no specter. Only silence. He closed the partition and faced the road. The headlights tailing him blinked out, one by one, until nothing trailed him but his own shadow. He eased off the gas, slowing to a crawl, but his heart thundered. He felt hollow, as if something had hollowed him out, behind him. The whisper drifted on the wind, carried through the rafters of the night. "Remember me." He reached into his pocket, fingers brushing the flimsy scrap of paper. He hesitated, then pulled it free. Under the moonlight, the words glowed. "Help me." He crumpled the note, letting it fall onto the floor like an abandoned plea. He pressed the accelerator, and the rig surged forward into the darkness. Out here on a Texas highway at 3 a.m., in a sleeper cocooned by steel and dreams, he understood. But some passengers never leave. They ride with you, breathe with you, claw at the glass until you finally open the door. And once they're in, there's no telling when they'll let go. And tonight, as the whisper faded into the vast emptiness, he knew that he would never be alone again. The highway lay stretched out before me like a ribbon of glass, pale and gleaming under the first weak rays of dawn. I'd hauled a load through the night, wrestled with crosswinds and slick pavement, but nothing had prepared me for this. A thin sheen glazed the asphalt as I crept over the overpass black ice at dawn. They'd warned on dispatch, but you never really believe warnings until they're written across your windshield in frost and fear. My rig's headlights cut twin beams through the mist, illuminating the road in front of me and revealing nothing but an expanse of shimmering danger. I eased the throttle, praying to every broken neon god that the tires would find purchase, that the weight of the trailer would grip the black mirror beneath me. At first, there was stillness, a breath of wind that sounded like a sigh. Then, imperceptibly, at first, the rig yawed a gentle drift that might have been the wind. I feathered the pedals, searched the mirrors, but saw nothing unusual. No other vehicles, no hazards, just the faint yellow lane markers dancing beneath my tires. And then, I felt it, a shudder, a tremor that ran the length of the trailer like a hand rapping on the steel. My heart hammered, and I squeezed the wheel, trying to wrest control back. The rig steadied. I exhaled, muscle memory taking over, easing onto the accelerator again. That's when I heard tires. Not outside, but inside an echo in my skull, a phantom whoosh that matched the beat of my pulse. I glared at the rearview mirror and saw nothing. The road behind was empty, the fog swallowing pavement and trailer alike. Yet the sound persisted, a whisper of rubber scrabbling for traction. I told myself it was the ice cracking, the trailer's suspension groaning under frost. I rolled my neck, took a sip of lukewarm coffee, and forced my mind back to the road. Dawn was breaking now, pale gold bleeding across the sky. Through the shifting haze I spotted a shadow, a shape looming at the edge of the highway, motionless. A man, maybe, standing at the guardrail, coat flapping in a wind I couldn't feel. His face was obscured by darkness, but I sensed eyes on me, two empty sockets drilling into my windshield. My chest tightened. I slowed, braked gently, and watched as the figure blurred, dissolved into the fog. But before he vanished entirely, I caught the gleam of something in his hand, a length of hollow pipe, its mouth black as coal. I pressed the throttle again, pushing forward, but the shudder came back. Stronger this time, and the tires outside my cab hissed as if sliding across the ice. I glanced at the tachometer. No spike, no slip indicator. The speed hovered at 25. The road was straight ahead, no curves, no junctions. So why was it rocking? I whispered a prayer, laid a hand on the dashboard, willed the metal to hold fast. Then, out of the mist, a second figure appeared. Clad in dark coveralls, head bowed, standing in the median beside the broken concrete barrier, he raised an arm. There was something skeletal in the angle of the bend, a crooked invitation. I jerked the wheel away, heart thundering, but the rig didn't respond. It slid sideways toward him, toward the cold, grinning shape that waited. I screamed as the side of the trailer scraped against the barrier, sparks flaring, ringing in my ears like church bells. Then a great boom, a roar of metal twisting, and the truck straightened as though freed from invisible chains. I caught my breath, hands slick with sweat. My rig's headlights bobbed as I regained traction, as though the road itself had released me from an embrace. I braked fully this time, coming to a shuddering stop. The mist pressed in through the windows, cold and clammy, and in that moment, even my own breathing sounded too loud inside the cab. I stared at the empty highway ahead, expecting the figures to reappear, but saw only ice-glazed asphalt and the fading glow of dawn. I stepped out, boots crunching on the frost-coated pavement. The world felt unreal, tilt-shifted, like I'd wandered into a dream. I walked around the rig, searching for damage, but found only a shallow scrape along the trailer's flank, barely more than paint rubbed away. Not enough to have caused the thunderous crash I'd heard. No dents, no sign of impact with barrier or beast. I traced the scratch with a trembling finger. A soft crunch behind me made my blood freeze. I spun, hand reaching for my pocket knife, but nothing was there. The first figure stood at the edge of the road, pipe still in hand, face half lit by the rising sun. I couldn't see his eyes, just hollows, as if the frost had hollowed him out from the inside. His coat was stiff with ice, hanging off him like shroud tailings. He tilted his head, listening, then took a step forward, just one, and vanished in a puff of white breath that froze the air. I stumbled back into the cab, slammed the door, and locked it. My hand shook so badly I could barely shift into drive. And all the while, that phantom scraping followed, scratching at the steel. I jerked the wheel again and the rig lurched forward, as if the road itself was behind me now, pushing me onward. I drove without looking back. the frost sliding away under my tires like a skin shed too soon. The horizon glowed with the promise of day, but I couldn't shake the dread that came with each mile. I've been over black ice before out here on the Lone Star State slabs. It's the trucker's hidden killer. But this was different. Something else had been there with me, riding the shoulder, keeping pace in the pale light, rattling my bones until I thought I'd break. A mile. Markers slid past in the gloom. 147. I passed 148. By the time I reached 150, the pavement warmed enough that the ice melted away, steam rising in ghostly wreaths along the roadside. I searched my mirrors, half expecting to see silhouettes trailing me in the mist. Instead, there was nothing, just the empty highway, endless. And indifferent. An hour later, I rolled into the yard at Longview, engine idling, heart still pounding. The dispatcher climbed up into the cabin, frowned at the frost on my hood, then at the unmarked scrape along the trailer. I opened my mouth, tried to explain about the figures at the guardrail, the phantom tires, the pipe-wielding shape that vanished. But who would believe me? He shook his head and pointed to a pothole cratered in the pavement. "Slid into this," he said. "Lucky it's not worse. You okay?" I swallowed, wiped sweat from my brow despite the chill. The rising sun glinted off the frost, and for a moment I thought I saw something moving in the yard behind the containers, a shadow that shouldn't have been there, tipping its head before disappearing. My jaw clenched. I nodded. "Yeah," I said, voice tight. "I'm okay." But I know what I felt out there on that stretch of black ice at dawn. I know it wasn't just the road trying to kill me. It was something waiting in the frost, something that skids alongside you, matching your every move, listening for the sound of your heart. And if you don't keep your eyes open, if you don't feel the ice under your tires, it might just step forward and reach through the windshield to claim you. I'll haul that load again, drive that stretch tomorrow because it pays the bills. But I'll never forget the scrape in the fog, the scraping tires just outside my sight, or the hollow face thing with the pipe that danced in the dawn light before it turned away. Next time, I'll be ready. Or maybe next time, I won't be. So lucky. He rolled through that stretch of highway just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky a bruised purple smear that bled into the dusty plains on either side. He had driven this route a dozen times before Interstate 10 between Seminole and Pecos, long enough to know there was never anyone manning the toll booth at exit 374. Always an empty booth. A rusted automated machine. A lone blinking yellow light waiting for a car that barely ever came through. Tonight was no different, or so he thought. The digital display flickered to life as he pulled up, and the total amount owed scrolled across the cracked screen, $0. He waved a hand at the sensor. The barrier arm cranked up and he eased forward. Without a second thought, he glanced in the rearview mirror, blinking twice against the sudden glare of headlights. No car behind him. He wondered faintly if his eyes were playing tricks around these parts the pavement sometimes shimmered in. The dusk heat like a mirage. He cut back onto the freeway, the hum of the engine his only companion, and settled into the slight curve where the road runs like a ribbon across nothingness. The radio crackled, static only, and then a faint voice called out, "1041, do you read?" He pressed the CB key reflexively, even though there was no one tuned to channel 19, and said, "1041 here, read you, but no one's there." Nothing. He chalked it up to interference and flipped the radio off. He promised himself he'd stop somewhere ahead for dinner. Maybe the flying A truck stopped 30 miles down that served decent grilled cheese and hot coffee. He tried not to think about the stories of night drivers who'd vanished between these towns, swallowed up by the emptiness. Hell, he thought, a long-haul rig doesn't just disappear into thin air. He'd heard the usual tales, ghost rigs seen, drifting without drivers, Phantom headlights crawling along service roads, voices over idle CB channels calling out names. He laughed softly at the idea it was all superstition. Scare stories to keep rookie drivers from nodding off behind the wheel. 20 minutes later, when he passed the next marker, his tachometer's little clock read almost exactly midnight. He could taste the coffee in his mouth from that one red-eye cup he'd thrown back earlier. He'd been driving since dawn and his eyes felt heavy. He reached for his coffee can in the cue folder and jolted upright. The toll booth loomed ahead again, the same deserted plaza, same blinking light. He tapped the brakes and rolled under the barrier, watching the display again. His breath caught when it read $15. He frowned and eased forward. He hadn't passed. The booth twice there wasn't a turnoff before this stretch. He checked the odometer. 474.3 miles since Pecos, same as before. He glanced back. No other cars. He shook his head, convinced the machine was glitching. Maybe someone had reprogrammed it as a prank. He reached for the radio and keyed. Base. This is 1041. You seeing this? Toll booth just slapped me with $15. Nothing. He pulled off at the next rest area. The fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the latrine door hanging off its hinge. He poured a fresh cup of coffee from a roadside dispenser and stared at the toll amount written on a scrap of receipt paper. $15. He checked the time on his phone, 12:07 a.m. He shivered. It felt too late for pranks. He tossed the coffee on the ground and returned to the truck. His rigged sleeper cab felt tight, claustrophobic, the small window offering nothing but blackness. He cranked the engine back to life and merged onto the highway again, vowing to put distance between himself and that booth. He thought about calling dispatch, but the wires were dead, cell signal gone. When he reached the next marker past mile 480, the booth blinked at him again. He slammed on the brakes, heart hammering. The display now read $28.50. He stared, mind reeling. $28.50. Who the hell was counting these charges? He eased through, his knuckles white clutching the wheel. No barrier. This time, just the empty booth and the low hum of the fluorescent light above the machine. He flicked on the headlights, aiming them at the sensor to force it to recalculate. No change. He told himself to keep driving. Keep driving and don't look back. He merged, then forced himself to slow. Back again, huh? He muttered, voice low. The display blinked. $43.75. He swallowed hard. Almost $44. He snapped his head left and right, searching the desert beyond the shoulders for someone. Something. Nothing but mesquite and scrub grass bending in a breeze he couldn't feel. He floored it. 100 miles per hour. The speedometer's needle jumped. The engine roared under the hood. His knuckles bled from gripping the wheel too hard. The rest of the night stretched out in one endless ribbon of darkness, speed, and the echo of his own breath. He didn't dare stop again, not for coffee, not for anything. Mile markers whizzed by. 482, 483, 484. Then, the booth reappeared one last time, lit like a tomb entrance in the middle of nowhere. He slammed on the brakes so hard the rig fishtailed. The world outside spun and frayed at the edges. He stared at the display. $107. $107. He would have laughed if he hadn't been so scared. He sat a long moment before. The booth, engine idling, flashlight beam dancing across the machine's chipped paint. The keypad glowed, the numbers carved into metal, but nobody to take the payment. He climbed out, boots crunching on gravel, and stepped up to the booth window. Moonlight caught something in the glass faint, white shapes, drifting figures huddled together like shadows clustered in prayer. He blinked, leaned closer. The shapes resolved into faces silent, hollow-eyed visages of men and women, some in tattered work uniforms, others in faded cotton dresses stained with desert dust. Their mouths opened in silent screams. He recoiled, stumbling back. The display flickered. Now $158.25. He ran to the rig, slamming the door. The engine caught. The rig shuddered forward. He slammed it into gear and tore away. The faces in the window disappeared, swallowed by the glass. He drove until first light, past when the sky blushed with dawn, without stopping to satisfy the booth's toll. When he finally dared to look at his receipt the next day in a sunlit diner, the total was $387.50. He left the receipt taped to the diner's bathroom mirror, a warning to the next driver. At least, that's what he'd told himself. But every hour since he'd paid that toll, every hour his bank account withdrew $20. No descriptions, no receipts, no names. Just the charge listed as Highway Toll Exit 374. He tried closing the account. Didn't help. He tried changing banks. Didn't help. Now every morning, without fail, an email arrives. Toll due, $20. A cold chime in his inbox. He stares at it, hands trembling. He doesn't reply. He can't stop it. He wonders how many souls the booth has claimed. How? Many nights he's been driven mad by the empty lane and the blinking light. He wonders if someday that toll will be more than money, if the booth will want payment in something far dearer. And he strings his days out in half-crazed terror, waiting for the meter to climb, wondering if he'll ever outrun the price of souls lost long ago, or if one night he'll pay so often that the machine's digits will overflow and then demand one final, unthinkable cost.